A terrible storm begins to fall in the middle of the forest, with lightning cutting through the dark sky. Under the heavy rain, a wounded warrior walks slowly through a field filled with fallen bodies, coughing up a lot of blood due to his injuries. He begins to count how many enemies he has already defeated. Looking back, the man realizes that a new group of opponents is blocking his path. The group leader claps his hands, surprised to see Wu Qiang, Rin still alive after so many wounds. The warrior simply breathes with extreme difficulty as he tries to gather his last bit of strength. The mysterious leader begins to hover slightly above the wet grass, demonstrating his superiority. He laughs mockingly and asks if anyone who uses that sword technique could ever survive like this. Wu Qiang, Rin calmly replies that his adversary actually knows nothing about the subject. The leader laughs at the provocation and warns that the weakened warrior will die one way or another very soon. 3 masked henchmen move rapidly through the air to attack the wounded warrior all at once. The hero's sword blade shines intensely in the rain, with drops of blood dripping from the tip. With a single circular, devastating movement, the protagonist cuts the 3 attackers down in mid-air. The bodies fall lifeless to the ground while he updates his mental count to 67. He realizes that at this pace, he has already managed to eliminate half of all the elite warriors from that sect. The boss smiles sadistically and says that this sacrifice is worth it to eliminate the world's greatest prodigy. The villain finally touches his feet to the solid ground and prepares to enter the combat personally. A massive shockwave ripples through the forest as he advances with absurd speed. The warrior stands firm in the rain while the enemy leader stares him down from a safe distance. With a sarcastic smile, the man warns that the protagonist will no longer be able to use his martial arts. Wu Qiang, Rin, complains that he talks too much and asks them all to come at once to get it over with. Completely furious at the insolence, the villain shouts the warrior's name and decides to end him right there. He jumps, delivering a powerful circular attack with his sword in an attempt to end that battle. The leader charges toward the hero, believing that victory is already guaranteed. The villain smiles, thinking his opponent was just bluffing before receiving the final blow. Suddenly, a sword cut appears on the leader's face, leaving him in total shock as he realizes what happened. The villain's body is sliced instantly, with blood spraying everywhere in the storm. The warrior reflects on the legendary soul, destroying sword technique, while observing the damage. He questions mentally if that man even had a clue about the true power this art possessed. Under a flash of lightning, the count reaches 68 with the leader's body fallen in the mud. Totally debilitated, the man begins to drag his feet, leaving a long trail of blood along the path. His vision begins to fail, and his body staggers from side to side without the strength to continue. Unable to take another step, the legendary warrior collapses, exhausted, in the middle of the grass. He opens his mouth, desperately trying to catch his breath while feeling the end approaching. The hero accepts that facing 120 enemies at once was too much even for him. He deeply laments not being able to keep his promise to return to his beloved Yang Mei. His eyes begin to close slowly as he accepts that his end is very near. Lying in the grass under the cold rain, he holds a book firmly against his wounded chest. His greatest regret is having to leave this world without being able to leave a successor for his art. He remains motionless on the hill with a red trail marking the entire path he traveled before falling. At that moment, the warrior feels something touching his face and opens his eyes slightly to see what it is. A little boy in simple clothes appears before him, offering a small purple flower with his hands. Wu Qiang Rin gives a faint smile and asks the child what kind of plant that is. He seriously warns the boy never to eat that herb, no matter how hungry he might feel in his life. The man explains that it relieves pain, possesses a deadly toxin that takes a life without the person even noticing. The wind maintains its strength through the mountain trees, shaking the leaves in the cold night darkness. As the warrior watches, the boy picks up a piece of a branch and begins to dig a hole in the earth. Without hesitating further, Wu Qiang Rin puts the poisonous flower in his mouth and begins to chew it to relieve his pains. The boy stops what he was doing and looks at the man, totally astonished by that attitude. Chewing the plant calmly, the warrior looks at the child and asks what his name is. The youngster looks fixedly with his expressive eyes and reveals that his name is Eo Ja-seo. The man realizes that he is very accustomed to death and deduces that he has already lost his parents. He asks the boy to stop digging and offers his secret book of valuable techniques. Warrior says that with that book, the boy will be able to make his own name known in the world. But Eo Ja-seo refuses the book immediately and says he would prefer just to get something to eat if he has any. The boy explains that becoming a master would be useless because he would end up dying just like the man. The warrior finds the boy's sincere answer funny and begins to laugh out loud, agreeing with him. He shouts that a master who exposes himself too much in the end always ends up finding death. Little Eo Ja-seo just watches all that shouting with a bored and impatient look. Soon after, the warrior begins to weaken for good because of all his wounds. The boy remains standing in the same spot, staring at the weakened man in a thoughtful way. He decides to help the hero by propping the man's arm over his shoulder so they can walk away together. The little boy uses all his strength to carry the warrior's heavy body through the forest. The hero praises the youth's body structure, saying he has a natural talent for fighting. He also notices the boy's intelligent gaze and decides to make an offer he cannot refuse. The man suggests that he learn those techniques to become a low-level martial artist. The boy listens to the proposal but replies immediately that he has no interest in that. He reveals that he is only helping because the man reminds him of his father who abandoned him in the past. Eo Ja-seo says that his father probably already died somewhere just like the warrior himself. Touched by the story, the man extends his bandaged, blood-covered hand, calling the boy. He hugs the boy with affection and says he reminds him of the daughter he had to leave behind. The boy is surprised and moved to feel the warmth of that welcoming hug for the first time. The warrior confesses it would have been wonderful if the boy were his own real son. To Eo Ja-seo, that affectionate gesture felt exactly like the warm embrace of a real father. Suddenly, the man's head hangs forward, and his body goes limp in the boy's arms. The legendary hero dies right there on the grass, leaving the special techniques book with the boy. And so the mysterious man departed forever, leaving only that instruction manual behind. 15 years pass, and Eo Ja-seo is now a young adult training hard with his sword, even practicing every day with the secret manual left by the master. He faced difficulties. Most of the book's content was extremely difficult and impossible to understand. Because of this, he decided to remove those complicated parts and adapt the strikes to his own body. He executes fast movements in the air, perfecting his unique and personalized fighting style. For the parts that required internal energy control, he needed to seek another alternative. He obtained a breathing method by tricking a third-rate drunken fighter at an inn. But while training with this ancient technique, his sword ends up breaking in half unexpectedly. He looks at the broken blade and accepts that, in fact, he has become nothing more than a low-level warrior. Even so, the young man continued training diligently only with the movements he was able to perform. Over time, he managed to master a draw technique that looked impressive on the outside. The young man sheathes his sword with extreme precision, demonstrating formidable visual control. He proudly christened his new creation with the name Tenfold Cultivated Soul's Sword. He grips the weapon's handle firmly as he prepares to test his new ability. The movements were very different from the original style left by the deceased mysterious warrior. However, the biggest difference between the two techniques was the level of devastating power generated. The power generated by the strike was so absurd that the young man himself is confused and doesn't understand a thing. He begins to strike funny poses in the forest, thinking about how to look like a true master. He decides to leave, thinking about having some hot soup while ignoring the damage he did to the tree. Right behind him, the huge tree splits in half because of the perfect cut he delivered earlier. Elsewhere, confident footsteps echo over a luxurious red carpet inside a large hall. An ordinary person would hardly have a chance to cross paths with a true master in their lifetime. This is because the strength of a true master is capable of shaking the entire world and moving nations. Great specialists of the martial world are usually treated with extreme reverence and respect. Powerful warriors line up and bow their heads with every step this great master takes. He walks solemnly along the red carpet while everyone around shows their submission. The fighters join their hands in a sign of deep respect before that imposing figure. But when it comes to Eo Ja-seo himself, his current reality is completely different. The young man is actually just a complete novice who is terrified of getting into serious trouble. As civil wars happen almost every year, sects recruited novices to replenish their losses. This situation was perfect for Eo Ja-seo, who decides to get in the recruitment line at a fortress. When his turn comes, the person in charge of registration stares at him coldly and asks what his name is. The young man thinks that if he pretends to be a martial artist, he could have guaranteed shelter and food for a year. The official repeats the question impatiently while the boy envisions his plan to avoid going hungry. With total confidence, the young man takes the writing brush to register his data on the sheet of paper. He concentrates and begins to trace the letters with mastery, leaving the evaluator quite surprised. He writes his name with impeccable calligraphy, demonstrating that he is someone very well educated. The man is shocked and comments that he has never seen an ordinary warrior who knew how to read and write like that. He even suspects that the boy might have come from some orthodox sect of great prestige in the region. Little does he know that the only things the young man knows how to write are his name and titles made up on the spot. The man asks about his title and finds it strange, never having heard of a technique by that name. Eo Ja-seo asks if there is a problem, but the evaluator covers with a smile and says everything is fine. He then directs the boy to go straight to the rooms of the blue quarters, number 19. The young man celebrates discreetly for having managed to secure his free meals for a good while. He recovers his imposing posture and confirms he understood the instructions given by the official. Blue Room sits right in the middle ground between the area for lost novices and that of the great masters, which means it is a medium-level place, ideal for living comfortably without drawing attention. His plan is just to eat plenty and slip away quietly before the martial arts tournament begins. While walking down the hallway, he smells a delicious aroma coming from the room and gets excited about the meal. He decides to enter quietly, planning only to eat in silence and without interacting with anyone else. But upon opening the door, he comes face to face with two men who stare at him intensely with distrust. The protagonist realizes right away that those two subjects seem the type to only bring headaches. The local guide ignores the tense atmosphere and cordially invites the young man to enter the shared room. One of the men sitting at the table takes the initiative and asks directly what the young man's name is. Using his cleverness, the protagonist replies with kindness and firmness that his name is Eo Ja-seo. He knows that if he speaks too much, the others will realize his real level, so he needs to act like a master. The warrior who asked slams his drink glass on the table and says he understood his answer. He introduces himself as Shimjil and points to his bald companion, saying his name is Sogu Chai. The bald bruiser takes another sip of his drink and asks the young man to wait a moment there. He stares at the protagonist with an intimidating look and asks which martial sect he belongs to. Eo Ja-seo invents that he is just a wanderer who trains a secret family sword technique. The bald man drinks a bit more and reveals proudly that they come from a distant region. The young man uses his knowledge and asks if they belong to the famous and renowned Jongnam sect. The spiky-haired warrior smiles with disdain, confirming that they do indeed belong to that sect. The protagonist decides to win their trust by citing a very famous warrior from that faction. He invents a heroic lie, saying he saw their great master defeat the dreaded skeleton demon. He praises their sect with much drama, saying that Master Wu, high in strength, was something unbelievable. Shimjil becomes extremely excited and shouts with joy at finding someone who witnessed the feat. The bald man also becomes very happy and offers to pay for more drinks in exchange for hearing the rest of the story. The young man realizes that making friends is actually very easy when you know exactly what to say to them. He smiles satisfied, thinking it is enough just to be nice and stroke people's egos to get ahead. The day dawns with the blue sky shining over the beautiful rooftops of that huge fortress courtyard. Eo Ja-seo walks calmly through the courtyard, feeling feeling that everything is going perfectly as planned, young Eo Ja-seo observes the vastness of the 10,000 Dragons Fortress with great attention. He is impressed to see that the grand scale of that place rivals the world's largest sects. The young man notices that they invested quite a bit of effort into building the tournament facilities. With that, he celebrates, thinking he will be able to eat and have plenty of fun during the entire next month. But he notices that many talented and strong people keep arriving at the location to enlist. The protagonist decides not to worry about that, since his only goal is to enjoy the free food. He begins to whistle happily while walking quietly through the fortress courtyards. The young man continues his path, hoping that the day's lunch will be a delicious hot meat soup. A gentle wind blows, shaking the green leaves of the trees under the beautiful blue sky of that afternoon. Suddenly, the young man stops walking upon sensing a sweet and mysterious fragrance floating through the air. A young red-haired girl appears and asks for what reason he decided to invade her quarters. Eo Ja-seo panics when he realizes he accidentally entered a restricted zone out of pure distraction. He apologizes politely, saying he was distracted, and tries to withdraw in the most dignified way possible. The red-haired girl just stares at him in silence, with a serious and analytical expression. But suddenly, she changes her attitude and asks enthusiastically to know the young man's name. The protagonist feels a chill and realizes immediately that that girl is synonymous with trouble. From his vast life experience, he decides that the best thing to do is avoid drawing attention and walk away. The girl appears by surprise right behind him and asks if he is one of the masters who came to enlist. He tries to play it cool by confirming slightly, but the young woman starts clapping, thinking that is incredible. While pretending to listen calmly to what she says, the young man plans to take steps back and run from there. To his total surprise, the red-haired girl challenges him suddenly to a duel right there. The protagonist falls into absolute despair, unable to believe the madness he just heard. Instinctively, he assumes a defensive stance to protect himself from any surprise attack. The girl praises his attitude, saying that others always ran away, but he decided to face her like a man. He realizes that the misunderstanding is huge and fears being seriously hurt by that girl's hands. Without giving time for explanations, she advances rapidly, saying she cannot give up the first strike. The young man goes into shock, noticing that the girl's hand is loaded with an absurd amount of energy. She delivers a powerful palm strike right to the young man's chest, generating a huge wave of impact. Feeling a terrible pain, the protagonist makes a colossal effort not to lose consciousness there. The impact drags him backward across the stone floor, while dust rises around with the force of the blow. He tries to hide the unbearable pain, holding his chest while attempting to keep the smile on his face. He laments bitterly when he sees that all the energy he accumulated with so much effort vanished to defend him. The girl is left completely wide-eyed and without reaction, seeing that the young man remained standing after the attack. She cannot believe that he is fine, even after receiving her palm strike with full force. While the young man stares at her seriously, the girl concludes with absolute certainty that he is a true master. Eo Ja-seo turns his back, trying to fake dominance, while suffering silently from the blow to the chest. He looks out of the corner of his eye with an expression of suffering, while trying to hatch a plan to escape from there. Internally, the young man begs to manage to flee naturally before he ends up dying of pain. Blood starts pouring from his nose while he tries to ask the reason she did that. The girl celebrates happily, saying she knew nobody would be able to resist her palm technique. Cleaning his nose, the young man plays it off and praises the blow, saying it was indeed an impressive technique. While planning to run away to have a restorative broth, the girl offers a piece of cotton to him. She explains proudly that everyone she faced bled from the nose, and concludes that her technique serves for that. The young man rebels mentally, thinking what kind of useless technique only serves to cause bleeding. The girl stares at him suspiciously and asks why he decided to receive her attack directly without dodging. Suddenly, she notices his sword and claps excitedly when realizing the young man is a swordsman. Eo Ja-seo feels cold sweat running down upon realizing the situation is about to get even worse. The girl warns excitedly that she will go get her own sword so they can duel as equals. The young man holds his head in total despair upon hearing he will have to face a sword technique. He shouts mentally, cursing his luck for having been caught by precisely the worst person in that place. Sitting in his room, the young Eo Ja-seo begins to clean his sword blade patiently. He reflects that a true martial arts master must always take very good care of his weapon. The young man knows that just the act of cleaning the sword with precision helps convey an air of superiority. With calculated and firm movements, he continues polishing the metal to give an impeccable look to the equipment. The sword's blade shines under the light, reflecting the focused and absorbed gaze of the young warrior. His two new roommates watch him with great admiration and praise his serious posture. Shim comments, surprised that the reverent way the young man cleans his weapon seems like the art of a craftsman. He adds that keeping one's hand so steady like that is not for just anyone. While the young man smiles to the side, the protagonist remembers that he spent 10 years at an inn cleaning the swords of various wanderers. The young man gets up from his chair in an imposing manner, placing his weapon back in the sheath. He recalls the deceased elder's advice to train the secret manual to be a low-level artist. He draws his sword in a fast movement and practices some very elegant strikes around the room. The young man knows that even though he is a weak warrior, he needs to at least appear to be a great fighter. To manage to survive in this dangerous world, keeping up appearances is his best defense strategy. He sheathes his sword with total mastery, making an imposing metallic sound to impress his colleagues. Both companions clap enchanted and say that he seems to be in perfect harmony with the weapon. Faking humility, the young man smiles and says that the sword has already become practically an extension of his body. Suddenly, loud noises of metal clashing start echoing from outside, calling everyone's attention. The bald companion enters the room running, warning that an ugly fight has started between two wanderers. Shim complains that those low-level fighters are incorrigible for not waiting for the official tournament. But since they were very bored, he suggests they take a quick look to see who the combatants are. Shim tries to act disinterested, but his colleague insists that the fight promises to be quite interesting. The bald man reveals that the fighters involved are known as the Poison Wolf and the Faceless Sword. Upon hearing those famous names, the two jump up, anxious to witness the combat. A large crowd is already gathered in the courtyard observing the two warriors ready to face each other. The public shouts and cheers, while a mysterious hooded warrior observes the scene from the middle of the crowd. The three friends approach the gathering, anxious to see the real abilities of the two opponents. The bald friend points to the eye patch, wearing warrior who carries chains with heavy axes in his hands. The eye patch wearing combatant stares at his adversary with a look full of fury and bloodlust. He then points to the other long-haired fighter who wields a sword very elegantly. The young swordsman advances with extreme agility, delivering a fast attack against the giant opponent. The two collide their weapons in the air, generating sparks under the watchful eye of all the spectators present. The giant with the eye patch holds the handle of his heavy axe firmly, ready to counterattack. He delivers a crushing blow that destroys the stone floor, demonstrating frightening physical strength. The fighters exchange violent attacks, and the sound of the weapons echoes intensely throughout the fortress. Curious about the fight, the bald friend asks Shim which of the two combatants is likely to win the duel. He analyzes that the swordsman has more refined techniques, and therefore should have the advantage over time. The bald man agrees with the tactical analysis, believing the swordsman's victory is almost guaranteed. However, Eo Ja-seo disagrees with his arms crossed and states with total conviction that the man with the axe will win. His companion thinks the hunch is strange, saying the swordsman possesses much stronger internal energy. The young man just smiles with a mysterious air and suggests they wait a little longer to see the result. He thinks that the difference in internal energy between weak low-level fighters is almost irrelevant. On the other side, the agile swordsman begins to pant heavily, demonstrating clear signs of extreme exhaustion. He tries to strike again, but the giant warrior blocks the attack easily using brute force. As predicted, the axe fighter pushes his adversary, who no longer has the physical resistance to fight. Shim is impressed with the precision of the hunch and praises the young man's keen combat vision. He asks how the friend knew the result, and the young man replies that he knows low-level fights well. Suddenly, a familiar voice interrupts the conversation, making the protagonist pale with fright right away. The girl from yesterday appears pointing at him and calls him quite loudly, "Hero of the double nosebleed." The young man falls into despair seeing the red-haired girl who almost killed him with pain the day before. The young man makes a bored face, hoping to get rid of the girl before more problems happen. The red-haired girl approaches him and asks if he isn't also interested in that fight. She puts her hand on her chest and states that until today, nobody who received her palm strike managed to be fine. The young woman extends her hand, explaining that all other targets always stayed in bed for at least 2 days. With a twinkle in her eyes, she concludes, very animated, that her judgment about him was totally correct. Eo Ja-seo laments deeply for having the bad luck of meeting that problematic girl again the very next day. Trying to be nice, he praises her technique and says it is a very rare ability to see nowadays. The young man tries to say goodbye, saying that if she keeps training, she will become a great warrior in the future. But suddenly, the crowd lets out a scream upon noticing that the agile swordsman was finally hit by the axe. The axe warrior shouts victoriously, claiming that the result of that duel has been totally decided. The other responds with fury, while the protagonist's friends notice that both fighters will end up dying. Shim laments the mutual death situation, while the bald man asks if nobody is going to do anything to stop them. The swordsman delivers a grazing strike to the opponent, making blood spray in the middle of the fortress courtyard. The companion laments, saying that only a true master with much courage could intervene now. The axe warrior advances with everything, determined to deliver his final blow to end the dispute today. The swordsman accepts the desperate challenge and decides that the two will fall together in that bloody battle. Eo Ja-seo gets in the middle of the two with his arms crossed and orders them imposingly to back away. While the girl complains that he disappeared the day before, a hidden weapon is thrown in their direction. She continues talking non-stop without noticing that a masked assassin has just attacked from behind her back. The protagonist notices the imminent danger and looks back, confused by the noise he just heard. A mysterious hooded man throws a sharp dagger infused with energy at the defenseless girl. Upon seeing the projectile flying, the young man falls into despair upon recognizing it as a lethal hidden weapon. He acts out of pure instinct and draws his sword rapidly to defend the girl from the treacherous attack. The young woman misinterprets the fast action and vibrates, believing the young man decided to fight against her like a hero. The protagonist uses all his ability to deflect the daggers that were coming in their direction at high speed. The force of the impact throws him backward, while he notices the projectiles were loaded with energy. He shouts in fright and warns the young woman that stealth attack was extremely dangerous and lethal. The young man spins in the air, trying to regain his balance while deflecting more of the flying daggers. The protagonist despairs upon noticing the projectile's force totally destabilized his body. One of the deflected daggers travels through the air and hits the collision point of the duelist's weapons with precision. Both original combatants look surprised upon feeling their weapons being pushed with such violence. Eo Ja-seo falls right in the middle of the dispute, blocking both while the girl faints beside him from the fright. The crowd around watches the entire scene in complete silence, shocked by what just happened. Companions shout enthusiastically, believing that he heroically intervened to stop the fight. Protagonist himself is left totally wide-eyed, not understanding how he ended up in the middle of that confusion. He finds himself forced to hold the two warriors' weapons while trying to maintain a calm master pose. Sweating cold and fearing for his life, the young man tries to hold the trimmer in his hands to not reveal his weakness. He stares at the two opponents closely, noticing that he is now trapped in a dangerous dead end. Shim shouts, shocked upon noticing that his roommate indeed dove headfirst into that dispute. The dagger falls to the ground with a metallic sound, while the assassin in the back grumbles, irritated for having failed. An aura of blue energy begins to emanate from the young man's sword upon colliding with the two fighters' weapons. He realizes, horrified, that the internal energy flow of both both opponents is running directly into him. The young man pushes, feeling that his arms will give out at any moment because of the absurd pressure. The axe giant prepares to spend his last bit of strength to deliver the definitive blow to the dispute. The protagonist begs mentally for them to stop using internal energy at the risk of blowing everything up. The swordsman accepts the internal energy challenge and throws all his remaining strength against the axe. The two shout furiously, concentrating all their power without caring about the consequences of the act. Eo Ja-seo goes into total panic and curses the two warriors in thought for having ruined all his luck. An immense beam of bluish energy explodes from the young man's sword, heading straight up into the clear sky. The public goes into delirium, screaming frightened upon seeing that the supposed master released a legendary sword energy. Both duelists are shocked to realize the young man is simply suppressing their internal energy with the sword. But Eo Ja-seo realizes horrified that, in fact, that is not at all what is happening there at that moment of despair. Suddenly, a huge energy explosion throws everyone away, and the protagonist lets out a scream while flying through the courtyard. Meanwhile, the mysterious hooded assassin takes advantage of the dust and throws a glowing dagger at the girls' group. The red-haired girl notices the lethal projectile coming her way at high speed and becomes totally paralyzed. She widens her eyes, seeing the glowing weapon approach her chest without being able to make any reaction. In the blink of an eye, a blade appears and blocks with great precision the mortal attack that was going to take the defenseless young woman's life. The deflected dagger flies far and sticks into a pillar, while the other warriors remain fallen on the ground after the impact. The red-haired girl looks back, frightened, and sees the weapon stuck deep into the thick wood of the pillar. So, Chi comments, shocked, that his companion used real sword energy to block the treacherous attack. Shim-jil is very confused, seeing that the young man managed to suppress the fighter's power and still stop the hidden weapons. While the protagonist is fainted on the ground, everyone starts to wonder what his true identity might be. In the break room, the companions talk and confess they never imagined the young man was someone so powerful. Lying on the bed, the protagonist hears everything and panics, thinking his abilities were exposed to everyone. The young man curses himself mentally for having fainted and acted like a complete novice in front of important people. He grips the sheet hard and notices that nobody would believe him if he invented an excuse like a stomach ache. Decided to face the situation, he finally gets up from the bed and starts massaging his still slightly sore head. So, Gu Chi shouts with joy upon seeing that his friend has woken up and says he is deeply moved by that whole situation. The friends praise the young man for having jumped into the fight without hesitating to save the lives of those two stubborn warriors. At that moment, the young man remembers the whole confusion from before and realizes he ended up getting into terrible trouble. He laments for having acted on emotional impulse and done something so dangerous that he normally never would attempt. So Gu Chai approaches and whispers that the entire fortress is talking non-stop about his heroic deeds that day. The bald man completes, saying he also saved the daughter of the fortress's great lord, and the young man is totally in shock. The protagonist is incredulous for having saved the lord's daughter, considering he didn't even know her before. From time to time, knocks on the door call everyone's attention in the room, interrupting that tense conversation. The red-haired girl opens the door with all the energy in the world and calls him cheerfully the hero of the nasal points. The protagonist makes a bored face upon seeing the young woman there and wonders why that brat came back to annoy him. An imposing man appears behind her and calls her attention, saying it is bad manners to treat the savior like that. She pouts and tries to justify herself, saying she was only joking because she already considers the young man an older brother. The man introduces himself as Mokyu Gun, the lord of the fortress, and thanks him greatly for saving his daughter. The protagonist almost has a stroke upon realizing that annoying girl is actually the daughter of the fortress leader. Trying to maintain his composure, he performs a respectful bow and says that the rescue was just a big coincidence. But inside, he begins to hatch a plan upon realizing that the local lord owes him an extremely valuable favor. The young man smiles to the side, imagining he hit the jackpot, and begins to ponder whether he should simply ask for a lot of money. he changes his mind, thinking asking for money would be too greedy, and decides it is better to gain some valuable item. Mako Gun says he insists on returning the favor and asks the young man directly what reward he wishes to receive. Putting his hand on his chest in a very noble way, the protagonist replies calmly that he didn't act just for money. The fortress lord is surprised and asks if the young man would like to become an official martial artist. The young man fakes pride and refuses the invitation because he knows very well that taking that position would bring too many problems for his life. The man is impressed with the young man's posture and suggests placing him as the instructor responsible for the new recruits. Demonstrating extreme modesty, he says it would be audacious to try to teach other people while still having so much to learn. Impressed, the fortress lord suggests he be his daughter's personal bodyguard for a generous salary. So, Gu Chai intervenes, saying there is no reason to hide that the rumors about his strength are already flying around the place. The bold man gives a thumbs up, all proud, and reveals with a smile on his face that he himself helped spread the rumors around. The protagonist flips out in absolute rage and shouts at his companion, asking why on earth he went and spread gossip like that. He knows that if everyone thinks he masters that legendary technique, several dangerous warriors will come after him. The young man concludes that the best option is to accept a medicinal herb that increases his internal energy and run away as soon as possible. He bows, asking for forgiveness for refusing the leader's invitation, claiming he needs to follow his own path. The fortress lord remains thoughtful for a moment and says he will grant any other request that isn't too absurd. With a subtle smile, the protagonist fakes disinterest but prepares to make his request for a special reward. The young man prepares to ask for a small, special medicinal herb as a reward for his great bravery, but suddenly, the fortress leader begins to scold his daughter for acting so childishly there. The man then turns, confused, asking if he really asked for just a simple medicinal herb as a gift. He questions if the young man plans to use the plant to increase his strength, and the protagonist freezes with fright right then. Everyone in the room stares at the young man with very serious expressions, expecting him to explain his words better. The protagonist remains in silence for a few moments while desperately trying to hatch a good excuse. He fakes nobility, saying that, in truth, he was worried about the serious wounds the duelists suffered. He adds that the real medicinal herb should be delivered to save the lives of those wounded fighters. The fortress leader and the others present are deeply impressed by such generosity from the young hero. He continues his encouraging speech, asking that all the warriors of the place be grateful to the kind leader. The young man states with passion that that good deed will attract even more high-level martial artists to the fortress. He finishes his dramatic show by shouting that the fortress will prosper like never before under the great lord's leadership. But inside, he is crying in despair for having wasted his reward because of a silly excuse. The fortress leader agrees fully and appears extremely touched by the wisdom of the young man's words. The man lets out a proud laugh, stating he will do exactly what he suggested to save the two warriors. The protagonist is totally depressed upon realizing he lost his prize and is now surrounded by dangerous rumors. But the local lord says he cannot let such an exemplary warrior leave without some personal compensation. The man promises to prepare an incredible gift that will surely please the young man in a surprising way. With a determined look, he warns that it would be very ugly if the young man tried to refuse this new offer of gratitude. The young man lets out a weak smile, dying of fear and begging internally for them to just leave him in peace. The fortress leader declares with much pride that he is extremely happy to have met someone so honorable, but soon after, his countenance changes, and he starts rummaging through his own clothes in a very mysterious way. He pulls out the dagger that the assassin threw earlier and asks if the protagonist can recognize that weapon. The young man recognizes the object as the flying guillotine, which is a famous hidden and secret weapon of the legendary Tang clan. The fortress lord confirms the information weapon and says that makes things much easier, since the weapon is very unusual. He explains that when the dagger is loaded with energy, it heats up like an ember and pierces any protective barrier. Because of this weapon requires the user to possess a large amount of internal energy to manage to use it. He adds that the Tang clan supports the fortress, and therefore it would make no sense for them to attack his precious daughter. The man then stares at the young man with seriousness and raises the suspicion that the true target of the attack could be the young man himself. The protagonist denies it immediately, stating that he has always tried to avoid conflicts to manage to survive in peace until today. He thinks to himself that things will get extremely irritating and dangerous if he gets involved even more in this. He fakes feeling a strong dizziness in his head to try to cut the subject and avoid more uncomfortable questions from the leader. The leader notices the young man's fatigue and decides it is better to leave that serious conversation for a more appropriate moment in the future. The red-haired girl says goodbye cheerfully, reminding the young man that the great martial arts tournament starts tomorrow. As soon as everyone finally leaves the room, the protagonist collapses onto the bed, letting out a long sigh of relief and exhaustion. He sits thoughtfully in the quiet room, trying to process all the information he just received at once. Suddenly, the young man widens his eyes in total panic upon remembering that the tournament, in fact, starts the very next day. The day dawns with a very clear blue sky of the great temples of the fortress, where the competition is about to begin. The protagonist decides to grab his sword in a hurry, because he knows that if he stays there, he will only find humiliation and suffering. He laments having to go away without his special reward, but recognizes that fleeing before the tournament starts is the priority. With all the determination in the world, he checks his equipment and prepares to slip away without being seen. But suddenly, his bald friend wakes up yawning and praises the young man's great dedication for being up so early. The young man finds himself obliged to play it off and fakes being very excited to watch the great fights of the tournament that day. Later, he joins the crowd of warriors in the courtyard to check the official fight schedule on the fortress mural. Several fighters around start gossiping, pointing at him and commenting on the supposed master who appeared in the place. The protagonist lets out a sigh of relief upon reading the table and noticing that his name was not listed to fight on the second day. He celebrates very happily upon noticing that he is also free from the third day's fights and plans to take the opportunity to eat well. But his smile disappears instantly when he finally finds his name scheduled for a frightening duel. The young man remembers with terror that his opponent is precisely that insane warrior who fought until almost dying yesterday. The protagonist falls into total despair upon realizing he will have to face that true monster in a real combat. He hears some people commenting around that his adversary was gravely wounded in the previous day's combat. The young man hopes very much that the opponent gives up today's fight, so he doesn't need to risk his own life. Suddenly, a loud gong sound echoes throughout the fortress, calling the attention of all the warriors present there. An elder of the tournament begins to make an official, very important announcement to all participants of the competition. He shouts that all participants will receive 2 silver coins guaranteed, regardless of whether they win or lose. The protagonist realizes that this amount is enough to eat and drink the very best at an inn for 2 months. He decides to wait for the fight to start to quit on the spot, take his reward, and run away as fast as possible. But suddenly, the red-haired girl appears by surprise right behind him with a very mischievous look on her face. The young man gets a huge fright seeing the meddlesome young woman and starts sweating cold with such despair at that moment. She greets him, very smiling, calling the young man a great hero, and showing extreme intimacy in the middle of the courtyard. The protagonist is paralyzed with such disgust upon seeing that problematic girl returned to bother him. He falls into total panic and wonders mentally why that girl full of bad luck keeps appearing in front of him. Decided to run away from her, the young man starts walking hurriedly, trying to ignore the presence of the insignificant girl. He turns around, irritated, and asks directly the reason she keeps following him through all the corners of that fortress. She makes a blank face and lies, saying that in truth she is only walking in the same direction by mere coincidence. The protagonist loses his patience and orders very harshly that she stop following him once and for all. With a mocking smile, she warns back that he shouldn't head down that specific path he chose. The young man ignores the warning and keeps walking while thinking that he always gets into terrible trouble when he is with her. But suddenly, he ends up bumping head on into someone and feels the impact of another person's body in the middle of the path. The protagonist widens his eyes, confused upon realizing he just committed a tremendous gaffe with a stranger. He retreats, frightened upon seeing a beautiful woman in white robes standing in front of him with a very serious look. In a calm, yet very cold tone of voice, she asks directly what the young man is doing in that restricted area. The young man despairs internally, confirming that, in fact, that red-haired girl only brings bad luck to his life. He joins his hands respectfully and asks for sincere apologies, claiming he was fleeing from a true haunting. The young man tries to fix excuse by saying he only got the path wrong and committed a tremendous lack of manners with her. However, upon raising his gaze, he focuses his eyes on the mysterious woman and ends up becoming totally hypnotized. The young man is bedazzled by the extraordinary beauty of that young warrior who emanates an extremely elegant aura. The red-haired brat appears and asks, laughing, if there is honey on her master's face for him to look so much. The protagonist makes a face, realizing that, in fact, he just got into another extremely embarrassing situation. The beautiful woman warns firmly that that area is restricted and that he cannot simply go away like that. The young man observes that imposing master in absolute silence, starts questioning where she could have come from. The woman in white robes scolds her energetic disciple, demanding she maintain the dignity of the clan. She introduces herself politely as Do-yeon, Seonhwa's instructor, and says she knows he saved the girl's life. The protagonist smiles awkwardly and asks for permission to withdraw as soon as possible from all that confusion. Do-yeon places her hand on the hilt of her sword, making it clear that things will not be so easy for him. She explains that even though he is the savior, he cannot disrespect the strict safety rules of that location. Seonhwa explains that dozens of curious men try to invade her master's residence every day. The girl completes that if they let him pass, the other gossiping invaders back there will want to enter too. Upon hearing that absurd revelation, the young man sweats cold from nervousness and realizes he is about to enter a big combat. Seonhwa says that her master from the Ime clan is a great warrior, but would not be a match for the young man's sword energy. The young man goes into shock upon hearing the famous title of that elite sect and starts to tremble with fear in thought. He recognizes the warrior's imposing nickname and realizes he is before a true legendary specialist. Without chances of winning in a real combat, he decides to take a very bold attitude to try to escape from there. He lets out a dramatic shout, declaring out loud that he would never wield a sword against a beautiful woman. The young man states with false nobility that he would prefer to die than to fight, making everyone around admire him. The beautiful Master Do-yeon makes a face of deep disgust and irritation at that theatrical show by the clever young man. The public in the courtyard agrees with the young man, saying nobody should point a weapon at such a beautiful woman. But Do-yeon ignores the chatter and begins to draw her glowing blade slowly toward the protagonist. The young man truly despairs and begs mentally for the red-haired girl to say something useful. Seeing the danger, the girl shouts desperately, swearing that the young man has no romantic interest in the master. The protagonist makes an immense drama, shouting in the middle of the courtyard that he would rather cut off his own leg than hurt the beautiful lady. But Do-yeon is not convinced so easily by that show of modesty and advances very agilely with her weapon. The young man truly despairs upon seeing the sword coming his way and shouts, swearing he only entered there by pure accident. He puts his hand on his chest and swears by his own life that he does not possess any kind of romantic interest in the young master. With an extremely fast and precise movement, the warrior delivers a swift blow that passes grazing the protagonist. She stares at him very intensely and sharply, asking if the words he just said are really sincere. The bluish gleam of of the blade passes right before the young man's eyes, making him realize how dangerous that woman is. He is paralyzed under the absurd pressure of the attack, while the blow's energy cuts the wind around his neck. Do-hyun observes him with seriousness and sighs relieved upon noticing that the young man's intentions seem to, in fact, be true. She says calmly that his determination seems genuine and decides to accept his apologies for that silly mistake. With an elegant gesture, the beautiful instructor sheathes her sword, deciding to trust the frightened young man's word. The protagonist almost has a nervous breakdown from such terror, while the men around find his attitude very noble. Do-hyun turns her back and warns that she will respect his wishes and let him go, but states she has her principles. She turns to the side with a very penetrating look and suggests they resolve that matter by fighting in the official tournament. The beautiful master walks away accompanied by Son Ho-wol while the protagonist walks in the opposite direction, quite thoughtful. The young man starts fantasizing about a very hot meat stew and a cozy bed for him to manage to rest in peace. But he soon realizes and notices that none of this matters when his own life is running such a great danger. He decides once and for all that the best thing to do is simply leave everything behind and flee from there as soon as possible. Suddenly, a man shouts, moved, praising the young man for having chosen to leave, just not to burden her. Several warriors consider him a wonderful master capable of understanding even the heart of a beautiful woman. The young man continues his path, grumbling that all that confusion only happens because of that annoying girl. He panics upon noticing that he already got involved in too many things that could end up revealing his true identity. He starts planning his return to the mountains as soon as all that tournament confusion finally comes to an end. The young man decides he needs to focus on his daily training until things at the fortress calm down completely. In the middle of the path, the young man spots Shim-jil training hard since early morning and is very surprised by such dedication. Upon observing the movements, he remembers the times when he practiced that same exhausting exercise in his isolation. He keeps watching his companion's firm steps on the sandy ground while analyzing his combat posture. Shim-jil keeps delivering strong strikes into the air with his heavy saber, without realizing he is being watched from afar. The protagonist notices that his friend's body is totally out of sync, proving he learned everything reading books. Shim-jil finally sees him and calls him cheerfully, asking where he has been all morning. The protagonist lies, saying he was organizing his internal energy, and asks what his friend wants. The saber youth feels a bit embarrassed and confesses he would like to ask for a very important favor from his companion. With a serious and shy look, he asks if the young man could give advice to improve his fighting techniques. The protagonist is surprised to see a proud warrior like Shim-jil leaving his pride aside to ask for help. He tries to dodge, saying he is low level and that his training focus was always to use only the sword. But Shim-jil begs, stating that a great master like him must surely know some useful technique. He explains, frustrated, that he has been training his physical strength with much dedication, but the results are lossy. The young man lowers his head, discouraged, confessing he feels he isn't having any evolution in his combat style. He demonstrates deep sadness while holding his heavy saber in the middle of the fortress training courtyard. The protagonist asks intelligently if his friend has thought about the reason for becoming so tired after performing the strikes. He thinks the fatigue came from his lack of energy and from the excessive use of brute force in the saber attacks. The young man shakes his head and asks in surprise if his friend, by any chance, bought a manual and tried to learn everything by himself. Shim-jil is in total shock with the revelation and asks, frightened, how the young man managed to discover his biggest secret. Protagonist smiles upon confirming that his friend was only pretending to be an official sect disciple. He puts his hand on his chest and reassures his friend, promising that that secret will never be revealed to anyone else from there. Shim-jil breathes relieved and thanks the young man greatly for showing himself to be someone extremely trustworthy and understanding. The protagonist remembers his past when he also tried to learn the techniques just by looking at the pictures. He advises his friend not to focus on the steps on the ground, but rather let his feet follow the natural flow of the saber. The young warrior remains thoughtful, repeating mentally those enigmatic words, while trying to understand the concept. Suddenly, his eyes shine with a great revelation upon finally understanding the true meaning of the advice. Shim recognizes that the protagonist was absolutely right about focusing solely on the weapon's natural flow. He realizes that when the saber makes its movement through the air, a completely different energy begins to form. A perfect, continuous flow is generated from the moment he stops, relying only on his brute force. The young man feels that his legs now automatically follow the weapon's swing in an extremely light manner. He executes a devastating circular strike that raises a huge curtain of dust and wind around the courtyard. The warrior lets out an enthusiastic laugh, confessing he has never felt such an incredible sensation of power before. So Gu Chai runs to his companion, shouting in amazement upon noticing that his saber style has changed drastically. With a smile on his face, Shim points to the protagonist, revealing he received valuable advice from that master. The bald man is fascinated to realize his friend just gained an excellent training opportunity. Several other fighters training in the fortress courtyard watch the scene with expressions of great envy. They whisper, wishing they had the chance to receive guidance from that mysterious young swordsman. The protagonist panics seeing Gu Chai shouting loudly and drawing everyone's attention for no reason. He decides to turn his back and walk hurriedly away from those two loud companions. Shortly after, the official tournament finally begins with the shrill sound of metallic weapons clashing in the arena. Shim enters combat and puts the new lessons into practice, fighting with great mastery against his adversary. Watching everything from the audience, the protagonist sweats cold and confesses he is too nervous to calm down. The men around him discuss the fortress ranks and the position they will earn if they win. The young man hears the conversation and wonders, confused, if the team leader position is the highest one there. A warrior explains the hierarchy, showing a pyramid where team leaders hold much status. The combat judge raises the flag, signaling the end of the duel under the watchful attention of the entire public. The announcer shouts to the whole crowd that Shim won the fight after knocking out his opponent spectacularly. The young winner celebrates by raising his saber to the sky under the warm applause of all the arena spectators. The protagonist breathes a sigh of relief upon noticing the calm reaction and plans to withdraw from his own fight discreetly. So Gu Chai runs to congratulate his companion on the victory, but the winner says it would be shameful to celebrate too much. He adds humbly that the positive result is entirely due to the brilliant advice he received from his friend. The protagonist approaches with an awkward smile, wishing them both congratulations while pretending to be very calm. He realizes it is now his turn to fight and decides to step into the arena, only to lose quickly and get out of there. But suddenly, someone touches his shoulder by surprise, making the young man turn around, startled, to see who is calling him. It is the feared green-haired swordsman, who thanks the protagonist for the medicinal pill that saved his life yesterday. The protagonist is left wide-eyed to see the man has already recovered and notes how strong the medicine was. The young man stammers happily about the recovery, but the man says he learned a lot from the savior's technique. The warrior bows, swearing he will fight with all his strength to not tarnish his master's honor. With an extremely serious and focused look, he declares firmly that he will give his absolute best in that duel. He lowers his head, asking please for the protagonist to grant him a teaching in combat. The protagonist is in absolute shock and completely reactionless upon seeing that feared warrior bowed before him. The spectators around begin to gossip, highly impressed to see the proud swordsman showing such respect. The crowd begins to shout enthusiastically, asking the young man to step into the arena soon and show everyone his skills. He gulps, seeing the situation is out of control and that now all eyes are on him. His bald companion begins to bellow in the middle of the audience, inciting the public to cheer even louder. The protagonist flips out in absolute rage and swears mentally that he will end up killing that troublemaking bald man once and for all. The adversary makes a gentle gesture, asking politely for the young man to step into the large arena first. Cornered, he realizes it is too late to back out and accepts that he will have to fight for real to survive. He takes his first steps toward the wooden ring, preparing for a direct and dangerous confrontation. The gong sounds, announcing the start of the fight, and the public goes wild, shouting non-stop around the ring. The protagonist stares at his adversary and wonders if his only remaining option now is to fight with everything he has. The opponent draws his thin sword with a very light and elegant movement, demonstrating the posture of an elite master. He raises the weapon, performing a formal greeting to the young man before starting his attack sequence. The young man analyzes the enemy's steps and realizes his movement technique is worthy of a legendary master. He knows that if he wants to win that combat, he will have to read every small step and dodge of the opponent with extreme precision. The adversary warns with a focused look that he will take the first step and advances rapidly, delivering a swift blow. The adversary advances at high speed, asking out loud for the protagonist to take it easy on him in the fight. The young man notices the pressure of his steps is very strong and wonders if he will manage to read the enemy's movement. He closes his eyes to try to focus only on the sound of the footsteps and predicts the attack will come from the left. However, the adversary changes direction rapidly, leaving the protagonist surprised by that fast feat. But to his surprise, the young man realizes that somehow he is managing to see the opponent's movements. He is very confused, not understanding how he can see the enemy's route with such clarity even though he is so fast. The green-haired swordsman notices the young man's focused gaze and wonders, frightened if he read his moves. He tries to calm himself, thinking that reading his fast steps would be an impossible task even for Eo Ja-seo. He notices the protagonist has his back turned and gains confidence upon noting he isn't even looking in his direction. In the audience, people comment that the opponent is just circling the young man because he hasn't found any opening. Others speculate the protagonist is paralyzed because he isn't capable of keeping up with the adversary's speed. The young man remains confused, trying to understand why it is so easy to see the trajectory of the enemy's blows. He focuses his gaze, noticing the adversary's speed is surprisingly easy to keep up with from there. In the middle of the noisy audience, a masked man hides his face and observes the progress of that combat attentively. The infiltrated assassin hides among the arena spectators. Fearing the master has discovered his plan, the adversary positions himself to deliver the definitive blow while the protagonist continues with his back turned, seeming calm. He concludes with certainty that the young man cannot keep up with him for having totally turned his back on his attack. The swordsman advances with determination, believing this is the perfect opportunity to finish the combat. Suddenly, the assassin hidden in the audience prepares to throw a new treacherous weapon in the direction of the arena. The protagonist feels a terrible chill and realizes that, in fact, an assassin in the audience chose him as a target again. The opponent hesitates for an instant upon sensing a sudden and drastic change in the young man's defensive posture. He is startled to notice the protagonist reacted instantly before he even tried to attack. He wonders if the young man manages to sense his exact location just by his presence and spiritual energy. Protagonist turns his head, confused, thinking he lost sight of the assassin, and starts looking for the enemy around. The opponent thinks the young man is just mocking him by turning his head in the middle of such an important combat. He decides to use all his speed to prove his worth and runs in the direction of the young man with hatred in his eyes. The protagonist is startled to see the fury stamped on the adversary's face as he approaches at high speed. The adversary shouts that when speed is the issue, he possesses more confidence in his techniques than anyone else. He slides his feet on the arena wood, making a sharp turn and raising dust while preparing the fatal attack. Protagonist freezes to see the opponent's furious look, but suddenly notices a beam of light cutting through the air behind him. The hidden assassin finally makes his move and throws the lethal projectile with all his strength against the young man. The young man prepares to react to the stealth attack, leaving aside the opponent coming from the front. The hidden weapon travels at high speed, cutting the air toward the ring with an extremely dangerous pink glow. Eo Ja-seo and his opponent continue in the arena while the deadly dagger travels by surprise toward the protagonist. The young man positions himself to intercept the projectile, confirming with dread that, in fact, the assassin is trying to kill him. The adversary is in total shock to notice the protagonist suddenly changed his posture to the opposite side. He is astonished to see the young man shifting the fight's focus to completely empty point behind his back by surprise. The protagonist draws his sword with extreme speed, preparing his block against the hidden weapon that is approaching. The young man follows the pink projectile's trajectory and realizes, relieved, that the weapon is coming much slower. The lethal dagger shines intensely in the air while it advances implacably toward the protagonist's chest in the arena. He recognizes the immense danger of the situation and realizes he needs to act fast so as not to be hit by the lethal attack. The young man spins his sword in the air with extreme mastery, preparing the perfect deflection at the correct millisecond. The dagger collides violently against the protagonist's blade, generating brilliant sparks that illuminate the entire arena. He holds the impact with both hands, feeling the strong pressure of the energy contained in the hidden enemy's projectile. He pushes to hold the shove, remembering he already went through a similar and dangerous situation the day before. The opponent watches everything from afar and is shocked to see an immense pink aura of sword energy emanating from the young man. He believes the protagonist is using all his energy to face him seriously in that friendly duel. The green-haired swordsman is inspired and decides that he too will give his absolute best in the fight against the young man. However, before delivering the strike, he is surprised by a well-aimed kick from the protagonist right in the middle of his face. The impact throws the adversary backward, while the young man deflects the dagger toward the audience where the assassin was hiding. The green-haired adversary falls backward, bleeding from the nose after receiving the young man's strong kick. The protagonist's companions watch the scene, completely shocked by the sudden outcome of that fight. The young man lands on the ground, panting and frightened, while the opponent faints for good before the entire audience. The defeated swordsman is left stretched out, motionless in the wooden arena, while a light dust rises around him. The protagonist looks at his own trembling hand, unable to believe he actually survived that combat. He notices his body is suffering a very strange reaction and starts sweating cold with so much worry. His blade keeps vibrating intensely for having blocked a projectile loaded with much internal energy. Suddenly, a thin stream of blood starts to flow from his nose, making him question if he ended up hurting himself badly. The announcer declares the young man's victory, and the entire fortress goes wild, shouting the name of the new local hero. So Gyu I Chin Shim Jil celebrate very proudly, shun that their friend defeated the opponent overwhelmingly. An elder in the audience comments, impressed, that the young man preferred to contain his power so as not to seriously injure the adversary. The public applauds standing, praising the magnificent character and exemplary nobility demonstrated by the young winner in the arena. The protagonist gives an awkward smile, knowing it's all just a big misunderstanding, but is thankful to be alive. The announcer hits the gong again and asks for everyone's attention to share an excellent piece of news with the spectators. He reveals that the young man has a combat scheduled for the following day against the dangerous axe warrior. The man adds that soon after, he will face the beautiful and powerful Do, Yan of the Emi clan, leaving the audience anxious. The announcer points to the young man and asks for the great winner to say a few words of thanks to the public. The protagonist decides to withdraw quietly and starts walking thoughtfully through the silent stone corridors. He tosses some coins into the air, grumbling, irritated by the audacity of those greedy fortress organizers. The young man complains that they are trying to use him as a circus attraction to promote the tournament and attract more rich fighters. He stops walking, startled upon realizing that this is not the appropriate moment to keep complaining about his life. The young man concludes he needs to pack his bags and flee that location as soon as possible so as not to really die. He lists all the dangerous people at the location, including the beautiful master, the mysterious assassin, and his companions. A sarcastic laugh echoes through the corridor, making the protagonist freeze in dread at the same instant. He turns slowly with a chill down his spine upon recognizing that sound of mockery that gives him deep shivers. The young man encounters the terrible Jang Chill, a despicable subject who used to beat him mercilessly in the past. The bully mocks the protagonist, asking if he really thinks he became a master after the fight 2 months ago. With a cynical smile, the man approaches and asks if the young man has already forgotten about when he had his fingers broken by him. The protagonist sweats cold, reliving the painful memories of when he was humiliated by this terrible subject. The enemy draws his sharp blade in a slow and threatening manner to intimidate the defenseless young man even more in that alley. He rests the side of his sword on the protagonist's shoulder as a clear and humiliating provocation of superiority. The subject warns he doesn't care about the tricks the young man used before, and that he will expose his farce to everyone. Some fighters observe the scene from afar without understanding the reason that insolent subject is challenging the young master. They whisper among themselves, commenting that the aggressor must have gone completely mad to mess with the fortress savior. The bully points the sword, swearing with hatred that he will tear off the mask of the young man who pretends to be a great warrior. The protagonist clenches his fists, remembering that subject's martial arts skills are only beginner level. But he laments that 2 months ago he couldn't even touch him and ended up being beaten in a cowardly and violent way. He feels immense fury when looking at the despicable man who broke his finger without showing any pity. The young man wonders, frustrated, how he can manage his revenge against that cruel opponent with his current strength. The bully smiles, thinking the young man really believes he can defeat him, and plans to use this to level up. He warns that this time the aggression will not stop just at a broken finger, and that he should prepare for the worst. He assumes an aggressive combat posture, while the spectators watch the tension grow between the two in the corridor. Suddenly, an unbearable and sharp pain hits the protagonist right in the chest, making him lose his balance on the spot. The enemy watches closely, maintaining his evil smile while the young man starts to writhe in pain suddenly. The young man falls into despair upon sensing his energy is out of control, causing a terrible internal burning. He realizes it was a mistake to block the dagger, and that his body accumulated too much damage from energy in the last few days. The protagonist starts coughing up real blood while falling to his knees on the ground, totally incapacitated to fight now. The bully is confused and asks, irritated, what kind of cheap trick the young man is using by pretending to feel sick like that. He laughs with disdain, saying the young man is performing a real play, and calls him a mere cowardly and weak beginner. The audience starts shouting at the aggressor, asking who he thinks he is to treat the hero in such a disrespectful way. The coward tries to justify himself by saying that the novices are just protecting themselves in the middle of that courtyard confusion. Upon hearing the insult, Sogu Chi comes truly enraged and advances, shouting with hatred against the daring man. He shouts with all his strength, asking how that subject dares to call them simple novices in front of him. The aggressor is startled by the bald man's size and stammers, saying he wasn't referring to him. He points his finger rapidly in the direction of the protagonist, claiming he was referring only to that lying novice. Sogu Chi becomes even more furious, saying he will not accept that anyone calls his great leader a novice. Without giving time for apologies, the bald man delivers a violent punch right in the middle of the coward bully's face. The man falls fainted immediately on the ground, while the protagonist watches, everything quite startled from afar. The bald giant advances to continue hitting the subject, stating it is time for them to have a serious conversation. He keeps delivering heavy blows against the opponent fallen on the ground, letting out all his accumulated anger. Sogu Chi shouts with anger, asking if the aggressor by any chance knows the true pain of being called a novice. Later in his room, the protagonist packs his things in a hurry, decided to flee that dangerous place. He picks up the book of the legendary sword technique he received from his former, deceased master with a nostalgic look. The young man observes the manual with affection, remembering with much longing the final advice he received from his tutor. He remembers the wounded master saying he possessed a perfect and blessed bone structure for combat. The former tutor lamented greatly, saying that if they had met a bit earlier, everything would have been different. He would say with a sincere smile that the young man would undoubtedly become the greatest martial artist in the world. The protagonist shakes his head, thinking all that old conversation was nothing but big nonsense. He grumbles that he almost died for real today, and that the title of the world's best actually serves no purpose. The young man finishes tying his clothes, decided that it is time to leave everything behind and flee from there. He thanks mentally for everything he went through there, and prepares to jump out the window and escape in the dead of night. Outside, the dry leaves fall from the trees under the fresh wind of that night that seemed very calm. But suddenly, the young man hears a scream calling for his hero name from outside the room and freezes with fright. The wooden door is opened extremely violently, generating a shrill noise that scares the protagonist. The red-haired girl enters running, very happy, celebrating having found the young man there in the room. She ends up tripping very clumsily and hits her face directly on the closed door, letting out a scream of pain. However, she recovers quickly and exhibits a beautiful piece of cooked, succulent meat that she prepared especially for him. Protagonist is confused, staring at the food while she explains she brought that to celebrate the victory. With a very animated smile, the young woman serves a hot drink for the young man to celebrate his first achievement in the tournament. He accepts the bowl suspiciously, thinking that receiving so much attention from that problematic girl is something very strange. The young man decides to take just a quick sip of the drink to please the young woman, and then try to escape from there. She stares at him closely, asking with a sparkling look if he liked the taste of the celebration drink. Soon after drinking, the young man starts to feel extremely dizzy and staggers backward, losing all his strength. He stares at her frightened, asking with a weak voice what on earth she put inside that celebration drink. The girl lets out a mischievous laugh and celebrates upon seeing that the effect of the medicine she prepared is really very strong. She reveals, smiling, that she prepared a sleeping pill for her friend to sleep very well and recover his energy. The girl adds that he needs to be 100% rested to manage to face the axe warrior tomorrow. The protagonist wakes up startled in the middle of the night, hearing his two friends talking calmly beside the bed. He looks at the window and falls in absolute despair upon realizing it has already turned dark and his escape plan was ruined. He gets up, startled, while So-gu Chai asks, surprised, why the young man is sweating so much in the middle of the night. The protagonist looks at his own hands, horrified, upon noting he lost the chance to flee the fortress. However, he notices his body is full of energy from having had an excellent night's sleep. Outside, the Imperial Guards watch the fortress corridors under the brilliant moonlight in the dark sky. The young man spies through the door and realizes it will be impossible to escape now because of the location's strong security scheme. He despairs upon remembering he will have to face the terrible axe warrior and wonders if he will leave there alive. He walks hidden through the fortress under the moonlight to try to find an emergency exit. The young man assumes a very serious expression while carefully analyzing the courtyard's wooden structure. He observes the ring where the combats will be held and decides to approach in silence to investigate. The protagonist steps onto the empty arena and starts examining the wooden floor, trying to find some flaw in the structure. He steps down with force and notices the wooden boards make a loud creak at the slightest sign of weight on them in the arena. Eo Ja-seo realizes the combat arena is much more damaged than he imagined. Upon leaning over, he discovers a sharp nail sticking directly out of one of the loose boards. The young man smiles upon realizing he can use this small detail of the setting to guarantee his victory. He imagines the adversary in the middle of all that dust and sand accumulated on the combat arena floor. With so much dirt scattered, the big guy certainly won't manage to see the protruding nails. The plan is to fake a retreat to make the enemy step on the nail and gravely injure the vital point of his foot. However, he soon gives up on the idea upon realizing such an absurd plan would hardly work. He lets out a discouraged sigh under the full moonlight, wondering what he is actually doing there. The young man lies on the ground, thinking if it wouldn't be much better to flee to the mountains and become a farmer. He almost cries out of frustration upon remembering the lie about his perfect bone structure and his difficult life. Upon supporting his hand to get up, the young man ends up accidentally breaking one of the floor's old wooden boards. With the scare, he loses his balance and slips awkwardly down the stairs in the darkness of the night. The young man hits his hand hard on the stone steps and feels the impact of the fall in his whole body. He complains of pain upon noting that even the stone staircases of that place are totally ruined. The young man gets up, cleaning the dust, and grumbles that the maintenance of that whole arena is a true disaster. Desperate about the following day, he jokes that he should personally go stick a nail in the enemy's foot once and for all. In the empty courtyard, only the mark of the stone broken by his fall remains under the silence of that cold night. The sun finally rises on the horizon, announcing that the feared day of the great tournament combat has just begun. The protagonist wakes up startled and covered in cold sweat after spending the entire night having terrible nightmares. He sits on the bed, still dizzy, while listening to one of his companions calling desperately for his name. The big guy warns the first fight of the day is already about to start and asks for the young man to get up as quickly as possible. Ja-seo holds his head, worried, and comments that his dream from last night was a true terror nightmare. He remembers having been sliced dozens of times by the axe warrior in his visions and trembles in dread. The young man is horrified upon recalling he only managed to survive a single attack in all the simulations he performed. He finally gets out of bed and walks barefoot through the wooden room, trying to calm down for the great confrontation. Despite the fear of dying, he realizes his legs are incredibly full of energy thanks to his friend's sleeping pill. Upon going out to the street, the young man is received with celebration screams from several people who already recognize him as a hero. Ja-seo is shocked to see the huge amount of martial artists who gathered in the courtyard to watch the combat. He realizes the fortress is using him as a circus attraction to attract even more warriors to the tournament. The young man walks, worried knowing the fortress's plan to recruit new soldiers is working very well. In the middle of the path, a man with a sour face provokes him, calling him a low-level warrior with disdain. Suddenly, the gigantic opponent appears in the courtyard, banging his huge weapon against the ground to intimidate the protagonist. The giant greets Ja-seo with respect and thanks him for the medicinal pill he received from him in the previous fight. The protagonist is paralyzed and starts sweating cold upon realizing the determination of the adversary who is in front of him. The big guy warns he will fight with all his strength to honor the combat, leaving the young man even more terrified. Ja-seo laments mentally the fact that none of those proud warriors seems to know the time to give up the fight. He breathes deeply and tries to maintain the master pose, suggesting they decide the confrontation in a faster way. The young man suggested they decide everything in a single strike, just as it happened in his fight against the previous warrior. He adds, saying with conviction that he will accept immediate defeat if he fails to defeat the giant with only one movement. The giant is surprised by such audacity and accepts the challenge of deciding everything with only one single decisive blow. The opponent holds the chain of his axe firmly, promising to answer the challenge by using his most powerful technique. Internally, the young man celebrates the success of his bluff, knowing he only needs to withstand one attack to leave there alive. The flag of the 10,000 dragons fortress flutters high under the blue sky, while the climate of tension increases in the courtyard. The arena gong finally rings, announcing the official start of the combat everyone there was waiting for, anxious. Both adversaries exchange extremely serious looks while they prepare to deliver the first and only blow of the fight. The axe warrior advances slowly through the wooden arena and asks for the protagonist to unsheath his sword. Ja-seo responds with master pose, stating he doesn't need to pull the blade from his scabbard to manage to defeat him. Inside, however, the young man is in panic upon remembering that yesterday's risky plan is his only chance of victory. His idea is to accumulate his internal energy to kick the loose earth of the floor and temporarily blind the opponent. He plans to take advantage of the enemy's distraction moment to turn around and attack rapidly from behind his back. The giant poison wolf axes advances furiously against the protagonist, destroying the wooden arena floor. Eo Ja-seo concentrates to the maximum to direct all his internal energy directly to his legs. He feels the remainder of his weak internal energy shining intensely in his body at the decisive moment. The mysterious flow of energy starts to travel throughout the entire extension of his right leg with much speed. The adversary approaches in a frightening way, and the young man realizes the exact time has arrived to act rapidly. He kicks the floor with much force, hoping to raise an immense cloud of dust to blind the great opponent. However, nothing happens, and the young man is face to face with the heavy axe. Without understanding what went wrong, he falls into despair upon realizing the arena floor is perfectly clean and without any loose dust. The young man realizes too late that the combat scenario situation is totally different from the previous day. The imposing warrior takes advantage of the chance and swings his huge weapon with full force against the protagonist. The sharp axe blade cuts the air in a violent arc, passing very close to hitting the young warrior. With the blow's impact, the young man is thrown backward and tries everything to manage to land on his feet on the wooden floor. Jang Chil reveals, laughing, that he fixed all the loose boards and cleaned the wooden arena early that morning. The protagonist stares at the cheater from afar with much anger upon realizing his plan was totally ruined. The man shouts that he reinforced the arena with solid oak so that they can fight without needing to hold back their blows. He smiles in an evil way, knowing he managed to neutralize the protagonist's dirty tricks with that renovation. The opponent prepares to attack again, decided to expose Soyop's farce in front of the entire audience. He starts spinning the heavy chain of his weapon, creating an impassable barrier in front of his adversary. The axe warrior advances with his devastating spinning attack, leaving the protagonist without easy escape routes. The big guy asks why the young man still hasn't pulled his sword, even in front of such a dangerous attack. The young man fakes calm upon praising the opponent's technique, while inside he despairs, wanting to give up the fight. Suddenly, the young man feels a strange burning return with much force. Right in the middle of his abdominal region, the flow of heat descends rapidly to his feet, making the pain disappear and bringing incredible lightness. He remains thoughtful, trying to understand what kind of miracle medicine his friend put in that drink yesterday. Without another option, the young warrior decides to bet everything on his fastest attack to try to end that duel. The young man concentrates, knowing he only needs to withstand this moment to manage to escape from that situation. The opponent becomes excited upon seeing the young man unsheathe the sword and promises to hit back using his best secret art. The heavy axe chain starts cutting the air at high speed, creating a frightening whirlwind in the arena. The devastating impact of the attack generates a huge destructive force that involves the protagonist on all sides. Soyop's companions watch everything, very worried, upon seeing the real power of the enemy's legendary technique. They comment the attack possesses no loophole and that their friend's situation seems to be extremely difficult. The enemy's immense heavy weapon hits the wooden floor with a thundering impact that makes the entire arena tremble. In the middle of all that destruction, the young man remains standing, very frightened, while the strong wind blows through his hair. The axe warrior shouts, with all his determination upon discharging the maximum force of his devastating attack. The protagonist plans to dodge rapidly to the side and make a simple attack just to pretend he fought seriously. He advances with determination and pulls his sword with an extremely fast movement while moving through the arena. A gigantic cloud of dust and debris rises in the air, completely covering both warriors in the ring. The opponent is stunned upon realizing his adversary simply disappeared from his view at the moment of the attack. The audience starts shouting in an uproar, trying to see what is happening behind so much suspended dirt. Even the cheater Jang Chill tries to protect his eyes from the dust, while trying to understand the combat's path. As the smoke starts to lower slowly, the silhouette of the protagonist is revealed imposingly in the arena. The young man looks at his own hands, surprised, and can barely believe he survived that blow so violent. His sword's blade ended up stuck in a very unusual way directly into the huge opponent's pants. The great warrior looks down, not understanding anything, while the protagonist tries to hide his own surprise. He notes that the strong floor would yielded completely with his blow and believes the rival used the scenario as a weapon. The giant is impressed, thinking Soyup neutralized all his maximum power with only one single move. Ja-seo falls into panic internally upon seeing the damage on the wooden floor, without understanding how that was destroyed. He trembles in dread upon seeing that the giant broke the solid oak wood, and considers him a true monster. The adversary lowers his head in sign of respect, admitting the fight was really decided in a single movement. The entire audience starts shouting the hero's name, celebrating a brilliant victory that was actually pure luck. Soyup stares at the immense hole in the arena floor, trying to contain his nervousness in front of that situation. The entire audience starts celebrating, shouting the young hero's name with enthusiasm in all corners of the courtyard. The giant So-gu-chi comments impressed that only a true master would be capable of using the scenery as a weapon. The spectators comment that the rumors about him being the disciple of a legendary hermit must be real. The protagonist places his hand on the opponent's shoulder to maintain the farce that everything occurred as planned. He tries to maintain his pose as an unbeatable warrior, although he is trembling with fear inside with the combat. Upon seeing the giant's creepy smile, the young man decides mentally that he never wants to face that monster again. The damage on the arena floor remains as proof of the overwhelming force of that entire collision of techniques. The young man moves away from the ring under the celebration shouts of the entire crowd that watched that quick fight. A man in the audience shouts, surprised, that the young man must be at the same level as the legendary 4 dragon generals. Soyup hears the comments and gets very irritated by the absurd rumors that started to arise about him. The local warriors comment, excited that the 4 dragon generals will soon send challenges to the young man. The protagonist falls into absolute panic upon thinking about the possibility of being challenged by warriors so strong. Meanwhile, in the backyard courtyard, the giant So-gu-chi trains his sword blows with quite determination. He executes fast and precise movements in the air, demonstrating that he is also a very skillful swordsman. Observing from afar with his bundle of clothes, the protagonist recognizes his companion's true talent. The young man feels a bit envious upon admitting that a fraud like him would never manage to compare himself to his friend. He decides to take advantage that the path is clear to flee quietly from the fortress before something worse happens. But before managing to take the first step, the young man gets a scare upon hearing his friend's voice calling for him. So-gu-chi approaches with much respect and asks humbly for the protagonist to teach him how to use the sword. The giant insists, saying he is the only master he can trust, leaving the young man completely tense. Soyup tries to dodge the request by praising his friend's training before trying to continue with his fast escape. However, the big guy understands everything wrong and is surprised, thinking the master read his entire fighting technique. The young man tries to justify himself by saying with modesty that, in truth, he still doesn't understand almost anything about swords. He adds by saying that, for this reason, he has no right to evaluate the skill of other swordsmen. Soyup's sincere words strike the giant deeply, leaving the young man paralyzed in the middle of the courtyard. The big guy starts reflecting in silence, thinking his own sword technique is too insignificant. He despairs upon deducing that his technique is so bad that it couldn't even be recognized by the great master. The young man clenches his fist with force, thinking that his fighting style doesn't even deserve to be called fencing. He laments his arrogance of the past, while the protagonist realizes his friend understood everything wrong once again. So Hyop observes his companion's dramatic reaction and realizes that his dedication to training is truly sincere. Decided not to get involved anymore, the protagonist prepares to leave when another friend emerges in his path. Shim-jil asks, surprised, what that big bundle of clothes is that the young man is carrying on his back. The protagonist breathes deeply and announces solemnly that he is leaving the 10,000 Dragons fortress. Shim-jil widens his eyes, extremely shocked upon hearing the sudden departure decision of his great leader. The friend tries to convince him to stay, remembering that the fortress leader position is already practically guaranteed. Soyap responds with disdain, stating he never had the intention of putting down roots in that dangerous place. The young man insists on his departure with firmness, asking for none of them to try to stop him from following his path. Shim-jil watches him leave with a look full of admiration and respect for that great warrior's detachment. The protagonist fakes wisdom upon, saying he needs to continue his journey to manage to understand the sword. He turns his back on his friends and starts walking in the direction of the fortress exit with calm and decided steps. The young man performs one last farewell bow, wishing the destiny reunites them again in the near future. The giant cries with emotion upon realizing that the rumors about the master's humble origin were totally real. Shim-jil is impressed with such determination and promises to return the favor at their next encounter. Far from there, the protagonist celebrates very happily upon realizing that his farewell speech stuck perfectly. He follows along the dirt roads surrounded by mountains and forests, breathing relieved for having escaped from the fortress. The young man walks happily, wondering what must be the next destination of his journey through the world. He decides the best thing to do now is to hide in the mountains and live simply to avoid problems. Suddenly, the sound of horse hooves, running at high speed, echoes from afar along the deserted dirt road. The young man gets scared immediately and enters guard position upon realizing someone is approaching fast. Suddenly, the girl San Ho appears mounted on a horse and stops right in front of the startled Yu Soyap. She complains, upset, asking how he could leave there so suddenly after messing with her heart. The protagonist is irritated by the young woman's drama and wonders what kind of sin he committed to deserve this. Without losing time, the young woman gets off the horse clumsily and grips the young man's hand firmly with enthusiasm. She is moved, thinking that he extended his hand with chivalry to help her get off the animal in safety. The young man wipes his hand on his clothes and asks why she is saying nonsense and calling him older brother. With a passionate look, the young woman reveals that she came until there only to confess her true feelings. Suddenly, one of the fortress guards appears running along the road and shouts desperately, calling for the young woman. Eo Ja-seo realizes she fled from home and advises her to return fast before her guard gets even more distressed. The man finally reaches both and falls to his knees on the ground, completely exhausted after running so much after her. He shouts desperately, asking what would happen if some enemy decided to set fire to her quarters. The man complains she is trying to act like the heroine of a romance fiction book she usually reads. The girl is left completely embarrassed and reactionless upon having her romantic fantasies exposed in front of the young man. She gives a forced smile while the protagonist laments mentally for being surrounded by so many crazy people. Later, they decide to stop at a simple inn on the roadside to eat and rest from the trip. The young man takes a sip of tea, relaxed, while observing the appetizing food dishes served on the wooden table. He celebrates his luck upon seeing the bag of silver coins he earned just by participating in that great tournament. The red-haired girl reappears, animated, jumping around him to try to get his attention again. He regrets not having continued his trip alone, knowing that problematic young woman will bring trouble. She smiles in a mischievous way while the young man stares at her with distrust, not knowing what passes through her mind. Uncomfortable with the excessive proximity, the young man pushes the girl's face gently so that she moves away a bit. He takes advantage of the moment to ask if she remembers the ingredients she used to make the mysterious sleeping pill. The girl explains, proud, that she asked her older sister, who is a renowned doctor, to prepare the sleeping pill. The protagonist assumes a very serious expression, asking if she by any chance knows what herbs were mixed there. The girl remains thoughtful for a few moments, trying to recall the details of the special medicine's recipe. He orders her to stay away upon noting she is only trying to come up with an excuse to make him return to the fort. The young man squeezes the girl's cheek lightly. She makes a funny face of indignation for being treated that way. Suddenly, a muscular and intimidating man shouts at both from afar, calling everyone's attention at the inn. He exhibits a human skull with a frightening smile and asks if they don't know who they are dealing with there. The bully reveals, furious, that he was already in a bad mood after having been humiliated earlier at the great fortress. He grabs the face of a young employee with violence, letting out all his accumulated anger. The aggressor threatens to tear off the poor boy's head, leaving the climate at the inn extremely tense and dangerous. Beside him, another bald man with a necklace of beads watches everything calmly while taking a sip of tea. The other inn customers whisper, frightened, and avoid looking at the aggressors so as not to get into problems. The protagonist realizes those subjects are very dangerous and decides not to interfere to avoid confusion. However, the red-haired girl stares at the scene with much indignation, feeling pity for the young employee. She gets up, decided to intervene, while the protagonist falls into despair. Predicting the worst with that attitude, he shouts in silence, begging for the girl not to move, but she ignores him completely with a furious look. Without another option, the young man puts his hand on his sword's hilt, prepared to act if the situation gets out of control there. The young woman shouts with all her strength, pointing her finger in the direction of the aggressors and calling everyone's attention. The protagonist is left totally paralyzed with fright at the girl's audacity and wonders what to do now. She demands that the aggressor apologize immediately if he wants to leave that inn alive today. The entire inn falls into absolute silence in front of the unbelievable courage of that red-haired young woman. The young man is furious for having been dragged into one more gigantic confusion because of his troublesome friend. She points at the aggressors, demanding they kneel while the fortress guard tries to contain her. Frightened, the other customers observe the scene, perplexed, without believing in the young woman's audacity to challenge such dangerous men. Some start to whisper among themselves upon recognizing that is the daughter of the local fortress lord. The buzz increases even more when people note that the legendary Eo Ja-seo is also present at the location. They start to praise the group of heroes, believing they would never tolerate injustice against the innocent. The people watch everything with admiration, thinking that courageous attitude represents the true justice of the masters. The cheater Jang Chill observes the entire situation from afar with a look of distrust and mockery. Eo Ja-seo starts to analyze the criminals with much attention, realizing there is something strange about them. The young man focuses his gaze on the red robes of the monks and feels that color brings him a familiar memory. He wonders, frightened, if those subjects belong to the white-eyed devil of the Crimson Cloak Band. That cruel group became known for massacring masters of several sects before disappearing without leaving traces. It is a dangerous organization led by the terrible leader known as the Demon of the Red Cloaks. The protagonist freezes when thinking about the reason that would bring such a merciless monster until that simple inn. Furious with the provocation, the criminal monks advance wielding their swords, ready to kill the young ones. So-yeop realizes the situation is out of control and prepares for the worst, knowing he cannot flee now. The aggressors jump with much agility, delivering fast and lethal blows against the protagonist's group. However, the fortress guard moves with extreme speed to protect the young Manhwa from the attacks. The blades clash violently in the middle of the hall, generating sparks under the watchful watchful eye of all present. The guard defends the blows with determination while the red-haired girl observes the combat closely. The protagonist celebrates, relieved upon remembering that the fortress guards are all highly qualified elite warriors. He deduces that if they manage to hold the enemies for some more time, the criminals will end up giving up the fight. So Iop praises mentally the guard's calm posture, who manages to deal very well with the combat's pressure. However, he knows that keeping fast, defensive movements consumes an immense amount of internal energy. The young man admires the elite warrior's energy control, realizing his level is truly superior. The protagonist admits his own energy would run out in a few seconds if he tried to do the same. The combat continues intense while the guard retreats strategically, keeping the young woman protected at his back. The fortress warrior shouts, worried, warning that the situation is becoming increasingly dangerous for her. One of the criminal monks advances with an absurd speed, delivering a treacherous attack in the direction of the young woman. The aggressor shouts with fury upon delivering the lethal blow, decided to end the girl's life once and for all. San Hoenji Siu fall into panic upon realizing that the enemy attack is about to hit her squarely. He knows that if the fortress lord's daughter dies, his own life will also be completely over. Moved by the survival instinct, the protagonist throws himself in front to try to avoid the imminent tragedy. He concentrates to the maximum to manage to block the enemy blade without inciting even more the opponent's fury. The young man pulls his weapon in a fast movement just to intercept the monster's lethal attack. The sound of the blade's clash echoes through the inn with extreme violence, calling everyone's attention. He celebrates mentally upon realizing he managed to save the girl without needing to initiate a direct combat. But suddenly, blood drops start to splatter in the air, leaving the protagonist confused with what he just saw. He is horrified to see the criminal monk's hand flying through the air, totally severed by the sword strike. The man lets out an unbearable pain scream while holding his bleeding wrist and falls to his knees on the inn floor. The aggressor stares at the young man with mortal hatred, promising to tear him in half for having severed his hand that way. The other criminals approach, furious with swords in hand, while Soyup feels his end has arrived. He tries to contain the despair and realizes that the only way to survive now is by pretending to be even stronger. He shouts, asking if they have extra lives to dare to attack the young lady of the dragon fortress. The young man assumes an imposing posture, threatening to finish them all there in case they continue with their atrocities. He warns firmly that even their leader will leave seriously injured if he decides to face him in that duel. The spectators are shocked by the hero's audacity in threatening the feared white-eyed devil directly. The criminal monks tremble with anger upon hearing their supreme master be insulted in such a petulant way. Suddenly, the plates and cups on the table start to tremble intensely, announcing the arrival of a great power. A sepulchral silence takes over the entire inn while heavy footsteps echo, slowly descending the stairs. The crimson warriors kneel immediately on the ground in sign of absolute respect to the man who approaches. The protagonist's group observes the staircase with extreme tension, realizing the true threat has just arrived. The terrible white-eyed devil of the crimson cloak silhouette emerges from the top of the stair with an extremely oppressive and cold aura. The old man with long white hair and long red robes stops in the middle of the way, staring at the young ones seriously. With his totally white eyes and no pupils, the feared villain leader exhales a frightening, murderous intention. Everyone at the inn falls into absolute panic upon recognizing the true demon of the crimson cloak in front of them. The guard begs for Hwa to retreat while she smiles animatedly, challenging the villain leader without measuring the consequences. The white-eyed devil of the crimson cloak descends the stairs, emanating a frightening and overwhelming presence at the location. Absolute silence takes over the entire inn, while the customers watch that scene with extreme dread. The criminal monks point immediately to the hero group, accusing them of having caused that whole confusion. The villain leader moves his fingers clears slowly while he starts to channel his immense internal energy in his hands. The power concentrated in his hands makes the air around tremble, demonstrating the absurd difference of strength between them. He crosses his arms with imposingness and demands absolute silence from his subordinates with a cold and cutting voice. The master scolds his men, saying it is an absolute shame they were cornered by only 3 worms. He releases a violent gust of energy that spreads like an overwhelming shockwave throughout the hall. The impact throws dishes and bottles through the air, proving that the elder's power is something totally out of the ordinary. The demon of the red cloaks closes his eyes to track the energy of the warriors present in the room. He focuses his keen perception and starts counting mentally the opponents who actually possess some strength. The villain realizes only 2 people inside there possess internal energy considerable enough to face him. Eo Ja-seo realizes that the monster is mapping the location just by sensing the spiritual energy of each individual. The elder wonders, confused, where the third person his subordinates mentioned before would be hiding. The leader enemy's oppressive aura makes the group retreat 1 step while they try to maintain their guard elevated in the hall. The protagonist realizes that the elder cannot sense his strength because his spiritual energy is too weak. He considers using that lack of perception of the enemy as a golden opportunity to flee from there immediately. However, the elder concludes mistakenly that one of the 3 warriors is concealing his energy with perfection. The villain assumes the young man must be a hidden master of supreme level and focuses all his attention in his direction. To make the situation worse, the girl starts laughing loudly and provokes the feared villain, confirming his identity in a bold way. She points to Ja-seo, introducing him as a legendary sword sage who defeats any enemy with only 1 blow. The protagonist almost has a heart attack upon hearing his friend invent lies so absurd about his skills. He tries to shout that he is just an ordinary warrior, but the girl continues provoking the enemies with much arrogance. The tension climate reaches the absolute limit while both sides stare at each other, ready to initiate the mortal combat. San, who displays a confident and arrogant smile while the protagonist and the guard sweat cold with dread right behind her. She imagines herself living one of her fiction novels about legendary battles between great masters and demons. The red-haired girl vibrates with excitement without having the slightest notion of the gravity and danger of that situation. She shouts with audacity, calling the villains to the fight and leaving the criminal monks completely furious in the courtyard. Without being able to stand the girl's insults anymore, the demon's subordinates prepare to advance with everything against her. The fortress guard tries to pull the young woman by the shoulder, begging desperately for her to stop the provocations. Eo Ja-seo makes a face of extreme fatigue, lamenting mentally for only wanting to have eaten a meal in peace. Outside, the sky has already turned dark completely under the light rain that starts to fall over the forest roads. The young Shimjeel runs, desperate through the woods, trying to find some clue about his friend's whereabouts. He observes the full moon emerge between the clouds under the darkness of that night that seems to become increasingly tense. He speeds up his step in the middle of the trees, knowing he needs to find the group before it's too late to save them. Back at the inn, the white-eyed demon starts emanating a frightening crimson energy from his own body. The protagonist realizes he needs to stop the combat immediately before the terrible elder decides to use his sword. With a calm and surprising gesture, the young man puts his blade in the wooden scabbard in the middle of all that chaos. The unexpected attitude of the young man to disarm himself leaves everyone in the room completely confused and surprised at the scene. The criminal monks lower their weapons, slightly without understanding what the true intention of that young man is. The protagonist assumes a firm posture and declares in a loud voice his true warrior name for those present. He states categorically that from that moment, his sword will remain sheathed during the conversation. The demon of the red cloaks observes the bold attitude of the young man and wonders what he plans to do with that. The villain says he finally understood and that the rumor about a master of a single sword blow was about him. The demon admits the ability to conceal spiritual energy is a notable feat, but that it will not intimidate him there. He shouts, furious, asking if the young swordsman really believes he can defeat him with only 1 single blow. The protagonist falls into absolute panic upon seeing the villain become enraged and tries to interrupt him, waving with his open hand. The young man shouts, desperate, trying to explain that the demon understood his words and intentions in a totally wrong way. He explains that he sheathed the blade because he is a weak warrior who is not worthy of crossing swords with a master so powerful. The young man asks the elder to look around the entire inn before taking any violent attitude against them. Two swordsmen enter the conversation, say that no martial artist there wants to fight the villain. The protagonist group is surprised when the warriors ask what the elder would gain from that fight. The feared crimson, robed white, eye devil grinds his teeth, showing terrifying rage. He yells in annoyance, asking if they are mocking him with that nonsense. The overwhelming pressure from the villainous leader makes Eo Ja-seo and his companions back away in fear. The tavern shakes violently as the monster's power fills the air. The elder glares at the young man with hatred and demands an explanation for his comment about being a weak warrior. Eo Ja-seo celebrates that his plan worked and prepares to try and persuade him calmly. However, one of the warriors draws his sword, saying he reached enlightenment through the young man's words. The two men proudly introduce themselves as the heroes of Grigio and decide they are going to fight. They explain that Eo Ja-seo's humble attitude served as a harsh wake-up call for their cowardice. The swordsmen abandon their title and declare that they will stand against the terrible elder's gang. Manhwa celebrates their bravery while Eo Ja-seo sinks into complete despair over this unwanted help. Inspired by the scene, other fighters in the tavern decide to draw their weapons so as not to be embarrassed. Several martial artists stand up and promise to join forces to face the terrible opponent. The crowd's defiant attitude makes the white-eyed devil even more furious in the hall. Eo Ja-seo starts breaking into a cold sweat upon realizing the situation is completely out of his control. Manhwa vibrates with excitement for the imminent battle while the fort's guard trembles in terror. The criminal monks observe the local warriors' movements with cold, threatening gazes. The enemy leader scoffs at their display of bravery while a warrior sneaks up behind him. Eo Ja-seo notices the warrior's sneaky movement and is extremely confused by it. The protagonist wonders if the man really plans to carry out a sneak attack from behind. He knows full well that such a cowardly strike would never work against a monster of that level. The attacker approaches silently with his sword, aimed at the back of the motionless elder's neck. Eo Ja-seo is surprised to notice that the villainous leader doesn't even move to dodge the imminent danger. The warrior jumps with all his might, delivering a powerful strike toward his opponent's neck. The white-eyed devil's eyes shine instantly with brutal, murderous intent. With an incredibly fast movement, the elder counterattacks and strikes the aggressor in mid-air. The villainous leader begins to sheath his blade with total coldness after the devastating blow. The defeated enemy's blood splashes violently across the deck, proving the abyss of power between them. Manhwa watches the brutality up close and is left completely shocked and terrified. Eo Ja-seo sighs, confirming it was impossible for an attack without internal energy to work against him. The red-haired girl starts trembling uncontrollably before that terrifying scene. She staggers backward in panic while the protagonist watches her, concerned about her reaction. In a mix of tears and desperation, the girl screams that she will take him down using her special technique. The white-eyed devil attacks another warrior mercilessly, spilling even more blood. The young woman watches the massacre, paralyzed by panic amidst the spreading pools of blood. The elder walks calmly over the fallen bodies, showing he will have no mercy for them. He yells furiously, calling Manhwa a noisy girl who does not know her place. The monster advances toward her like a bolt of lightning while the girl screams in terror, unable to react. Eo Ja-seo laments in desperation, thinking it would have been much better if she had fainted earlier. The loyal guard of the fort jumps in front to protect the young heiress from the imminent danger. The terrible elder notices the protector's approach and focuses his deadly gaze upon him. The guard delivers a desperate defensive strike to try and contain the relentless villain's advance. The two blades clash with violence, creating an explosion of sparks in the middle of the combat. The defender grinds his teeth, applying all his strength to resist the terrible clash. However, the white-eyed devil concentrates destructive energy in the palm of his free hand. He fires a powerful blast that throws the guard violently backward upon impact. San-hoa screams in desperation upon seeing her only protector be defeated so easily. She enters a state of total shock, realizing she is now completely defenseless before the monster. The white-eyed devil delivers a devastating energy cut toward the paralyzed San-hoa. The red-haired girl closes her eyes tightly and lets out a desperate scream, expecting the worst. Suddenly, a mysterious warrior appears, leaping under the light of the full moon to intercept the fatal blow. A gleaming sword is thrown with extreme precision to block the enemy's devastating attack. The blade collides with force against the elder's attack, generating a large luminous impact in the middle of the courtyard. Sparks fly as the girl opens her eyes, startled to realize the sword saved her life. The energy collision generates a brilliant explosion that lights up the entire deck of the inn that night. The impact of the block is so powerful that it forces the feared villainous leader to take a few steps back. The mysterious sword spins gracefully through the air after successfully repelling the terrible opponent's attack. A beautiful swordswoman descends from the sky with extreme agility and grabs the hilt of her weapon mid-air. She lands elegantly, assuming an impeccable combat stance before everyone present. The warrior walks with firm steps across the courtyard, exhibiting a deeply serious and focused gaze. The newcomer is revealed to be Do-yan, the famous and skilled disciple known as the Jade Sword. The white-eyed devil observes the girl and realizes he has felt that formidable presence before. Do-yan introduces herself formally as a proud disciple belonging to the renowned Ime sect. The warriors around are in shock, recognizing the legendary Jade Sword fighter from Ime. The terrible elder repeats the sect's name with disdain while analyzing his new, powerful opponent. He shouts furiously, saying that she is just another insolent girl who does not know her place. Do-yan emanates a cold combat aura while Eo Ja-seo watches the scene, relieved to receive help. The combatants position themselves in the inn's courtyard, preparing for a deadly clash against the villain. The elder mocks the Ime sect, saying the young woman's presence reeks of the academy's weak teachings. He asks with arrogance if she truly believes someone of her level can stop him inside there. Do-yan responds that the world is already tired of suffering from the terrible elder's atrocities and crimes. San-hoa celebrates her master's arrival while the protagonist thinks the girl is a magnet for trouble. The wounded guard leans on his sword and decides he will fight alongside the newcomer to help in the combat. Eo Ja-seo thinks that with the help of two great warriors, they finally have a real chance of winning. Do-yan praises the guard for having protected the young heiress, showing formidable internal energy. The protector thanks her but highlights that if Eo Ja-seo hadn't been there to save the day, the worst would have happened. Suddenly, the protagonist delivers a quick blow to the back of San-hoa's neck, leaving the warriors surprised. The guard is left completely shocked, not understanding why his ally attacked the young lady like that. Eo Ja-seo asks for calm and explains that she only fainted because the emotional shock was too much for her. The young man continues his logical reasoning, pointing to the true danger right before them. He suggests they must focus on eliminating the great threat in the courtyard before any other concerns. The warrior agrees with the plan's logic while Do-yan nods, saying it is a very prudent choice. The white-eyed devil grinds his teeth, feeling extremely offended by the opponent's attitude. He explodes in fury, releasing a wave of crimson energy for being ignored so audaciously. The two allied warriors advance in perfect synchronization to attack the terrible master of the crimson robe. The fort's guard runs with determination, wielding his sword to deliver a powerful frontal blow. He collides his blade against the elder's block, starting a direct confrontation of physical strength and metal. Meanwhile, Do-yan leaps into the air with great agility, delivering quick strikes with her jade sword. Sparks fly intensely while the trio exchanges attacks and defenses in a frantic rhythm of deadly combat. The villain mocks the legendary warrior, saying her strikes are delicate and weak like those of a child. Taking advantage of the gap, the guard moves silently to deliver a surprise attack from behind the elder. However, the terrible enemy leader blocks the rear strike without even needing to look back at the courtyard. The defender makes a face of effort upon realizing his attack was intercepted with extreme ease. The white-eyed devil begins to channel a terrifying purple energy in the palm of his free hand. With extreme speed, the monster grabs the guard's face with his hand wrapped in sinister energy. Du Yaeon watches that brutal scene and is left totally in shock at the opponent's scary speed. The villain stares the opponent in the eyes and says his mistake was having abandoned the young Harris's protection. He releases a terrible purple energy explosion at point-blank range, throwing the unfortunate guard far away. Diane watches in horror as the guard is suffocated and runs desperately to try and save him. The white-eyed devil exhibits an extremely cold and merciless expression while dominating his opponent. The young warrior from the Ime sect delivers a quick advance to attack the terrible demon in the courtyard. She yells to Eo Ja-seo, begging him to get Son Ho out of there immediately before it is too late. The protagonist is startled to hear the unexpected command and realizes he needs to act very quickly. He yells back, telling her not to worry as he is already taking the girl to a safe place. Seo starts dragging Shan Hoa across the tavern floor under the watchful and confused eyes of those present. The trickster Jang Chil observes the scene indignantly, asking if the young man is really running away alone from there. The crimson-robed villain shouts that he will kill them and crush their corpses under the tavern's rubble. Do Yan spins her sword with extreme skill, preparing for a direct and deadly duel against the monster. The warrior vows to rip out the elder's filthy tongue, while he mocks her audacity with contempt. The two opponents clash their blades with full force, starting a violent fight in the tavern's courtyard. The villainous leader uses his sharp claws to try and hold and break the Ime disciple's sword. With a thunderous impact, the tip of Do Yun's sword shatters, flying into pieces through the air. The young warrior retreats in a hurry and is shocked to see that her weapon was damaged by the enemy. One of the sharp pieces of the broken blade grazes Eo Ja-seo and sticks into the wooden railing. The heroes of Gujo watch the combat in despair, seeing that the jade sword is being overcome. The protagonist realizes he cannot hesitate and decides he needs to escape that place as soon as possible. Son Ho wakes up dizzy on Eo Ja-seo's back, mumbling confusedly while trying to understand the situation. Suddenly, Jang Chil appears, shouting scandalously, calling everyone's attention to the protagonist. The girl recognizes the trickster's annoying voice, and Eo Ja-seo is infuriated by that inopportune interruption. The young man ends up dropping the girl, who falls awkwardly against the balcony's wooden structure. The protagonist glares at Jang Chil with hatred and curses the scoundrel who never learns his lesson. The trickster points his finger and yells lies, saying that Eo Ja-seo is the great hero who will defeat the villain. The white-eyed devil turns his head sharply in the young man's direction upon hearing that statement. Jang Chil smiles maliciously for having managed to stop his great rival's silent escape there. Tension takes over the place with the trickster pointing at the young Hmong man under the watchful gaze of the terrible demon. The villain starts walking slowly toward Eo Ja-seo, wielding his sword with real threat. The protagonist is furious the traitor and promises he will take him to the afterlife if he dies there. Jang Chil exhibits a mocking smile, believing he managed to get away and put his rival in danger. In a genius move, Eo Ja-seo praises the accomplice, pretending that all of it is part of a secret plan. The young man points at the traitor and yells, ordering him to immediately release all the deadly poison. Jang Chil enters absolute panic and screams in desperation that he knows of no poison and is innocent. With scary speed, the crimson-robed demon advances with his claws toward the traitor. He grabs Jang Chil's neck tightly, suffocating him instantly before he can react. The trickster chokes in terror and tries to beg for his life, claiming to be just a simple looter. The protagonist pretends to be in admiration of his ally's supposed heroic sacrifice to trick the villain, though. White-eyed devil is confused by the bluff and decides he needs to get rid of that poisonous body. With a violent blow, he throws the trickster over the railing, away from his own body. Jang Chil plummets from the balcony, spitting blood and colliding with extreme force against the wooden floor. He falls unconscious on the lower floor right next to where San, Huai, is recovering from the fall. Eo Ja-seo watches his rivals fall from above with a deeply serious and tense expression on his face. The terrible elder faces the young man and asks how long he will continue pretending and hiding his power. The villain yells that cheap tricks will not save the swordsman's life and demands a fair fight inside there. He points his sharp sword toward the protagonist, ordering him intimidatingly to fight. Eo Ja-seo analyzes the enemy's posture and realizes his bone structure and eyes are misaligned. The young man has a surprising revelation and deduces that the white-eyed demon is unable to see him. With a confident smile on his face, the protagonist finally discovers the terrible opponent's weak point. He knows that fighting goes against his beliefs as a weak warrior, but realizes now he has no other option. Eo Ja-seo puts his hand on the hilt of his sword, knowing that this is the perfect and only chance to win the duel. Eo Ja-seo assumes an imposing stance and declares out loud that he will be the one to defeat the terrible demon. The inn's courtyard falls silent under the moonlight, with the warriors preparing for the final combat. Do-Yan leans on her broken sword, trying to catch her breath after the violent attack she suffered from the elder. The white-eyed devil observes the young man in absolute silence, trying to gauge the opponent's true strength. The protagonist wields his blade and categorically states he will take responsibility for facing the leader. He politely asks for Do-Yan to step back and protect the other disciples who are injured in the place. The warrior worries and warns of the elder is extremely dangerous and that the young man will be putting his life at great risk. Eo Ja-seo gives a side smile and replies that there has never been a single day in his life that wasn't a big gamble. He reflects pensively on what it truly means to have to fight and survive as a low-level warrior. Yan is deeply admired by the courage of the young man, who does not hesitate to risk his life for others in the courtyard. The young woman refuses to let him fight alone and decides to wield her broken weapon to also participate in the battle. Suddenly, the warrior advances with determination, leaving the protagonist completely surprised by that attitude. Eo Ja-seo analyzes the elder's behavior and confirms that the terrible enemy's vision is, in fact, very limited. The crimson-robed villain remains motionless in the courtyard, waiting for his young opponent's initiative. The young man focuses his gaze on a specific gap and decides he will attack the enemy directly from behind. He knows full well that the only way for a common warrior to defeat a great master is by taking advantage of every opening. Eo Ja-seo approaches silently, waiting for the exact moment the opponent makes the slightest oversight. The weaver-eyed devil notices the approach and reacts with a quick cut that splatters blood through the air. The elder shouts in annoyance, asking where the coward is who said he would fight him for real. The protagonist makes a face of frustration upon realizing his sneak attack was foiled so easily. He retreats quickly, knowing he will need to wait patiently for a much better opportunity to act. The young man starts hatching a new tactic based on creating a false opening to trick the terrible opponent. Meanwhile, Do-Yan faces the bald monk, the villain's subordinate, firmly wielding her broken blade. The two exchange swift blows in the courtyard, generating brilliant sparks with every collision of metal in the middle of the combat. The bald monk mocks the warrior's strength, saying her strikes have style but no real power. Irritated by the sexist provocations, the Ime disciple states that the opponent is not even worthy of her sword. With an agile movement, she hits a powerful kick in the enemy's chest, throwing him backward with violence. The monk retreats staggering and spitting blood after receiving the terrible impact of the young warrior's physical strike. Eo Ja-seo observes the scene sneakily, positioning himself right behind the wounded subordinate in the courtyard. The monk recovers from the kick and advances furiously, vowing he will create an opening to defeat his opponent. He raises his weapon with determination, believing he will be able to overcome the Ime sect disciples' defense. The protagonist takes advantage of the enemy's distraction and prepares to deliver a cowardly blow behind his back. The young man provokes the opponent, asking if, with only one arm, he can really handle the weight of his blade. The monk turns around irritably and challenges the young man to show the full strength of his supposedly light sword in the duel. Instead of dueling honestly, Eo Ja-seo simply throws his entire sword toward the opponent's face. The blade hits the surprised enemy's forehead, making blood gush instantly with the impact. The protagonist approaches calmly and confesses that he had lied about how he would fight at that moment. The monk spits blood furiously and curses the young man's absurd cowardice for having thrown the weapon that way. Eo Ja-seo responds coldly that in a life or death fight, honor is no one's main concern. He immobilizes the wounded subordinate from behind, holding him firmly to use him in his next move. The young man whispers in the desperate enemy's ear, warning that he will need his help to survive there. He mocks him, telling the man to relax as he already used his acupuncture points to stop the bleeding on his forehead. In the center of the courtyard, the white-eyed devil continues looking for the protagonist without being able to locate him. The elder yells furiously, demanding to know where the little rat is hiding so cowardly in the hall. With great rage, the villainous leader steps with extreme force, destroying the inn's wooden floorboards. A violent shockwave spreads while the monster yells for the young man to come out and fight once and for all. Debris flies all over the courtyard while the protagonist continues, using the enemy's body as a human shield. The elder detects the slightest noise and delivers an overwhelming sword blow in the direction he heard the movement. The white-eyed devil's eyes shine intensely, certain he has located the young man's hiding place. A colossal energy cut advances, destroying the entire deck toward the protagonist and his human shield. Dust spreads as the violent energy cut completely destroys the inn's deck. The white-eyed devil emerges amidst the smoke, believing he has defeated his ultimate opponent. The terrible elder smiles victoriously and mocks, saying it was impossible to hide that presence completely. However, the bald monk in his hands whispers in fear, revealing that it was actually a trap. Suddenly, the tip of a sharp sword pierces the villainous leader's own chest. Completely unexpectedly, the red-robed demon widens his eyes and spits blood upon realizing he has been stabbed in the back. Eo Ja-seo smiles victoriously upon revealing that he pierced the body of the subordinate monk himself to hit the villain. The bald monk laments his tragic fate, realizing too late that he served only as a mere human shield. The protagonist savors the triumph and mocks the dangerous situation from which he managed to escape with his brilliant tactic. The bodies of the two opponents fall impaled by the same blade, decreeing the end of the terrible threat in the hall. The thud of the bodies colliding against the wooden floor echoes throughout the entire inn amidst the absolute silence. The heroes of Gujo watch that scene completely in shock, unable to believe what they just saw. Du Yan focuses her eyes on Eo Ja-seo, deeply impressed by the young man's intelligence and courage. The young man sighs in relief for finally having put an end to that deadly and terrifying combat. But immediately afterward, he enters a panic, yelling for everyone to flee from there and vowing never to return to that fort. Suddenly, Du Yan lets out a desperate scream, alerting the protagonist about imminent danger right behind him. Eo Ja-seo turns slowly and feels a terrible chill upon realizing the approach of freezing energy. In his last breath, the white-eyed devil delivers an overwhelming palm strike right into the young man's chest. The protagonist spits blood and lets out a stream of extreme pain upon receiving the brutal impact of the spiritual energy. He is thrown violently through the air while wondering confusedly what just hit his body. Eo Ja-seo feels his chest freeze completely and goes into a panic with the terrible sensation of cold in his meridians. The agonizing elder spits blood and says his white demon spiritual palm will make the young man suffer greatly. The villain promises a fate worse than death while the young man starts to lose consciousness on the floor. The protagonist collapses on the destroyed floor, deeply lamenting having gotten involved in such a huge mess. He faints, thinking that a weak warrior like him should only live peacefully and quietly to survive. The young man wakes up startled from his thoughts and realizes that the nightmare of that night has finally come to an end. The sun shines brightly the next morning, lighting up of the beautiful and peaceful 10,000 dragon fortress. Eo Ja-seo wakes up startled in a comfortable bed, thanking mentally for still being alive after the combat. He sits on the bed and curses the deceased elder, complaining of the terrible pain he still feels in his chest. The young man presses his own chest, grumbling that the villain's freezing technique like hell itself. He opens a relieved smile upon realizing that despite all the suffering, his time to go has not yet come. The protagonist thinks he must be more resilient than he imagined, and that perhaps the heavens have a plan for him. A female voice laughs softly and praises him, calling him the great master who defeated the terrible robed demon. Eo Ja-seo to get huge scare and falls backward onto the pillow upon noticing the beautiful woman's presence beside him. The mysterious young woman smiles to herself, finding amusement in the protagonist's exaggerated reaction and funny words. The young man recovers from the scare and asks politely where exactly he is and what the beautiful woman's identity is. She points at herself, exhibiting a welcoming and charming smile that leaves the young man quite flustered. The infirmary room is full of medicine cabinets and martial herbs, organized impeccably. The woman observes the protagonist with a friendly and sympathetic gaze while she prepares to respond. Eo Ja-seo compliments her, saying she is extremely beautiful, and asks again what her name is. She gets slightly embarrassed and comments with a shy smile that she had never heard such a compliment. The young woman introduces herself as Chong-a Hyan, the official in charge of the Great Fortress's medicine pavilion. Suddenly, the room's door is opened with violence and Son. Hao appears crying and yelling out of concern. The girl runs desperately through the room, begging to know if her dear friend is really going to die. She approaches the bed in tears, saying she heard that the freezing technique that hit him is fatal for the body. Son, who asks if that is really true while the doctor nods, leaving the young man terrified. The person in charge explains that the demon's freezing palms block and seal all internal energy channels. She compliments, saying that even the young man's acupuncture points can be frozen definitively. Two young women look at the protagonist with expressions of deep concern and pity for his state. Eo Ja-seo lowers his head, completely depressed upon realizing his martial energy might have been destroyed. Eo Ja-seo feels a terrible spasm of pain in his chest, while his meridians start to suffer from the cold. The young man screams in agony and rises in the infirmary bed upon feeling the acupuncture points closing. The Dr. Chong-a Hyan writes in her book, confirming that the freezing palms did, in fact, block his energy. San, who cries copiously upon deducing that the hero sacrificed all his spiritual strength to save her in the courtyard. Girl declares emotionally that she will take care of the young man for the rest of his life, even if he becomes a useless man in a fight. She throws herself crying onto his chest, leaving the protagonist deeply uncomfortable and exhausted by the drama. Chong-a Hyan tries to calm the girl down, saying the fortress's lord is already looking for a yang energy medicine for the cure. However, the doctor warns Eo Ja-seo not to use martial arts in any way for now. She explains that forcing the frozen meridians will only cause terrible and unnecessary pain to the young man's body. Outside Eo Ja-seo reflects on the past, remembering when he tried to accumulate his spiritual energy. He recalls that his training with breathing techniques from elders in the snow brought no practical result. The young man's Danshin seemed to reject any type of progress in cultivation. No matter how hard he tried in the snow, he concludes that since he never wanted to be the world's greatest swordsman, the loss of spiritual energy won't really be missed. The protagonist sits on the steps, considering asking for the prize money instead of the medicine when he hears steps on the stairs. Chong-a Hyan appears bringing a bowl of medicine and comments that the young man seems very well for someone who is sick. Eo Ja-seo holds the ceramic container, staring at the dark liquid with a face of extreme mistrust. The doctor insists, saying he needs to drink the medicine made with the best healing herbs from the Sichuan region. The young man takes the bitter potion, all at once under the watchful eye of the young woman who monitors the treatment closely. He makes a horrible face, complaining that the taste is so bitter it seems more like a poison than a medicine. The young woman smiles at the complaints and comments that even a normal person would be able to take the medicine without drama. Eo Ja-seo asks about the powerful sedative he received earlier, asking if there was any magic herb in the recipe. She explains that it was just a common sleeping pill that strongly stimulates the acupuncture point responsible for sleep. The young man is intrigued to learn that the sleep point is located right near the upper dantian in his head. Suddenly, an assistant appears, warning about an injured person and asking for some sleeping pills to alleviate his pain. The protagonist finds the situation very interesting and decides to take some pills for himself while the doctor walks away. He sneakily opens one of the medicine cabinet drawers and finds the bottle with the desired sedatives. The young man decides to take a sleeping pill in his quarters before the pain in his chest worsens again. Eo Ja-seo swallows the medicine and makes a priceless face upon feeling the extremely bitter taste of the pill in his mouth. While walking through the fortress, he hears shouts of discussion and the sound of training blows coming from the main courtyard. Some local guards argue with the trickster Jang, Chill's henchman, complaining about their group's lack of posture. The rat of Guzhou mocks the guards, stating he doesn't need to ask permission from mere subordinates to train there. He smiles with disdain and orders the low-level warriors to get out of his way immediately with great arrogance. The guards react furiously, warning that Master Eo Ja-seo will not let that lack of respect go unpunished. The protagonist walks by the courtyard and gives a lazy yawn, ignoring completely the confusion around him. Jang Chill takes the opportunity to spread the rumor that the young man lost his powers and that he can no longer protect anyone. The henchmen burst into laughter and mock, saying the great master has now become just another useless weakling there. The trickster finishes by saying that the young man will pay very dearly for having dared to mess with his men at the inn. Eo Ja-seo ignores the insults, but feels his chest throbbing with pain and winces upon remembering the frozen meridians. He turns around confused upon hearing a sudden noise and notices that Jang Chill's henchmen have gone silent suddenly. The provocateurs turn pale and are paralyzed with fear upon spotting two imposing figures approaching. Protagonist observes the group's exaggerated reaction and wonders if by chance he knows the warriors who arrived. He recognizes the new visitors and remembers they're the famous warriors known as the Seven Rats. Jang Chill is extremely furious at being called a rat and threatens to finish the protagonist right there in the courtyard. One of the henchmen interrupts, pointing startled at the arrival of the plain, face sword, and the feared poison wolf axes. The two legendary warriors walk with great imposition through the courtyard, attracting everyone's attention in the fortress. The subordinates whisper terrified, commenting that the influence of those two supreme masters is gigantic. The two powerful combatants ignore the henchman's presence and stop directly before the young protagonist. With great respect and reverence, the two warriors bow their heads before Eo Ja-seo in the middle of the courtyard. They explain they came to pay their respects and express relief at seeing the young man recovering well from his injuries. Eo Ja-seo is extremely flustered and tries to disguise his weakness, smiling sheepishly while he greets them. The two warriors ask if the protagonist will watch the martial arts tournament that will happen tomorrow. The Axeman laughs and explains they were already eliminated prematurely from the regional level competition. They reveal that the famous Dangjia song, known as the Poison Dragon of Sichuan, will participate in the tournament. Eo Ja-seo is startled and asks if his beautiful sister, who always accompanies him, will also be present at the event. The swordsman gives a side smile, confirming that is exactly why they are going to prepare and take a bath. They say goodbye to the young man amicably, while the jealous Jang Chill's group watches the entire scene from afar. Right afterward, the protagonist feels an extremely painful stabbing in his chest and bends over, groaning in pain. The henchmen suspect the scene and start to think the young man didn't lose his spiritual strength for real. The henchman's leader reprimands his men, calling them incompetent idiots for fearing a weak warrior. He exhibits a malicious smile, stating that this is the perfect opportunity to punish the young man once and for all. The aggressor points at Eo Ja-seo and says it's obvious that the young man doesn't have the strength even to stand. The protagonist continues suffering from the intense pains in his chest while trying to recover in the courtyard. The leader draws his weapon intimidatingly and orders the young man to draw his sword to pay for what he did. The band of the 7 brothers makes a ridiculous combat pose, but one of them notices they are missing their youngest brother. Eo Ja-seo screams internally, suffering from the pain in his chest and the overwhelming sleepiness caused by the sedative. He realizes that if he doesn't release all that accumulated and suffocating energy trapped inside his body, the young man sincerely fears his chest will explode from so much accumulated pressure, making him die right there. In the fortress's training courtyard, a mysterious elder holding a wooden staff observes the place. The old master, known as the King of Staffs, exhibits a calm and wise smile while holding his weapon. The courtyard gets tense with the group of aggressors surrounding the protagonist under the watchful eye of the mysterious elder. The hooligan's leader repeats his threat, vowing he will make the young man pay dearly for having faced his men. Eo Ja-seo curses in annoyance, realizing those cowards only attack him because they think he lost his powers. The young man turns to the aggressors and asks if they don't know the legendary story of the King of Staffs. He points dramatically to the elder beside him, revealing that he is the legendary Master Ja-seo. The protagonist tells that the master lost his energy in the past, but that people were wrong to decree his end. He hits his chest with pride, stating he always believed in the strength of that man who never let himself be beaten. The elder Ja-seo hears the compliment surprised, while the young man recounts how the master defeated invaders years ago. The young man yells, asking if they think a true master becomes a weak warrior just because he lost his strength. The King of Staffs intervenes, asking the youngsters for calm and agreeing that the young man is only saying the truth. The hooligan's leader tells the old man to shut up and not get involved so as not to end up getting beaten too. The elder remains in absolute silence, but exhibits a deeply irritated look at the man's lack of respect. Eo Ja-seo bows respectfully and asks politely for the master to lend him his staff for a moment. The young man assumes a serious stance and vows he will use the staff to teach those hooligans good manners. He tries to lift the wooden staff with determination, preparing to deliver a powerful defensive blow. However, the protagonist widens his eyes upon realizing the weapon is incredibly heavy for his body. He cannot lift the staff and ends up dragging the wood heavily across the floor under the enemy's mockery. The aggressors burst into laughter upon seeing that the supposed master has no strength even to hold a staff. So see almost falls face first onto the ground due to the absurd weight of the elder's wooden object in the courtyard. The young man wonders in desperation if that extreme weakness is a side effect of the sedative he took earlier. Feeling his chest burn, he realizes he needs to find a way to alleviate the suffocating pressure in his body. He holds the staff's hilt with both hands, applying all the remaining strength he still possesses in his arms. The aggressors decide that this is the perfect opportunity, and all advance together to attack the defenseless young man. The protagonist focuses on directing all the accumulated pain in his chest to his legs to try a blow. He steps with extreme force against the courtyard floor, releasing at once the energy dammed up in his body. The young man screams in effort, knowing he needs to expel all that spiritual pressure to manage to survive. The impact of his step generates a colossal thud, raising an immense amount of dust all over the courtyard. An extremely violent gust of wind is created by the blow, surprising the adversaries who were advancing. The enemies are repelled by the strong wind and ask themselves, startled, if the young man actually still possesses internal energy. Eo Ja-seo is completely exhausted and trembling after discharging all the painful pressure from his meridians. He observes the surroundings, confused and panting, trying to understand the immense destruction he caused with his step. The hooligan's leader advances furiously, delivering a swift sword blow toward the protagonist. Eo Ja-seo turns around startled and tries to defend himself using the heavy wooden staff as his only protection. The opponent jumps, delivering a downward cut, while the young man shrinks to try and block the attack. The protagonist lets out a moan of pain upon feeling the terrible terrible impact of the blow against the staff's heavy wood. Unexpectedly, the heavy staff hits the aggressor leader's chin with extreme force, making him spit blood. Eo Ja-seo starts crying copiously, in pain while he continues brandishing the heavy object to defend himself. He delivers another sequence of clumsy blows, throwing the hooligan's leader far away in the courtyard. The guards who watch the combat are confused upon hearing the sound of the young man's crying during the confrontation. They conclude emotionally that the young man is crying out of pure compassion and pity while punishing those criminals. The spectators are deeply moved, thinking the young man's painful cry is a sign of pure goodness. Eo Ja-seo continues hitting the other aggressors, who scream in pain and beg for mercy in the courtyard. The protagonist cries in pain, asking the reason for so much madness while he beats the henchman without stopping. One of the fallen hooligans gets emotional, believing the great hero is shedding tears of pity for him. The man reaches out crying and begs desperately for the noble hero to save his life right there in the courtyard. The old master Yap-sung watches all that bizarre confusion and exhibits an amused smile at the situation. With all enemies defeated, Eo Ja-seo sits on the steps exhausted while the guards approach gratefully. The guard thanks him emotionally, saying it was wonderful to see the arrogant henchman finally punished. The protagonist points to the fallen thugs and asks, with a tired voice, for them to be taken to prison soon. The guards vibrate with pride at the young man's supposed generosity and promise to arrest all the criminals quickly. They grab the miscreants by their hair and start dragging them out of the fortress's training courtyard. Eo Ja-seo leans with difficulty on the iron staff while trying to catch his breath under the elder's gaze. He returns the heavy weapon to the king of staffs and thanks him politely for having lent him the object. The young man asks, surprised at the reason for the staff being so heavy and if the old master usually trains with that. Yap-sung smiles, taking the object back, and asks how the young man knows so much about his history and title. Eo Ja-seo scratches his head and confesses that the king of staffs was his great childhood idol and that he tried to imitate him. The young man smiles sheepishly and comments that staffs are excellent weapons and that they possess wonderful handling. The elder bursts into laughter, liking the answer, and agrees happily about his weapon's great handling. The protagonist makes a respectful bow and decides to withdraw to finally rest and alleviate his pains. He walks slowly back to his quarters under the watchful eye of the old master, who remains motionless in the courtyard. The king of staffs observes the young man moving away and thinks with sympathy that he is an extremely interesting young man. The fortress's lord, Mamoru, approaches the old master and apologizes for the delay in coming to receive him. The master replies that it is all right because he ended up meeting a very curious young man while waiting in the courtyard. Mamoru explains that the young Eo Ja-seo was hit by the white-eyed devil's freezing technique recently. The king of staffs changes his expression to a serious countenance upon hearing about the terrible freezing technique. The fortress's lord invites the master to come in and drink some good wine while they talk more privately. The elder accompanies the host, but remains thoughtful about the young man he met and the state of his meridians. In the middle of the night, the protagonist rises in his bed, suffering from the terrible pains that worsened after the fight. At the room's table, So-gu-chi and Shim-jil dine peacefully, talking about the friend's lamentable state. They comment on the gravity of the villain's freezing technique while watching their companion groan in pain in the bed. The two agree that at least the fortress offers luxurious banquets every day as thanks to the young man. Shim-jil eats animatedly while the protagonist gets up with difficulty. Calling the friend's attention in the room, the bald ally asks where he is going, and the young man responds staggering that he needs to go to the bathroom urgently. Eo Ja-seo walks with slow and trembling steps through the fortress's dark courtyard toward the outdoor latrines. He presses his belly, sweating cold, and wonders if that suffocating malaise due to the medicine he took earlier. The young man curses his bad luck, wishing only that his body would return to normal so he could act. He screams mentally, vowing that he will flee that cursed fortress as soon as he has the slightest opportunity. The young man decides to focus on getting to the bathroom to relieve himself and hatch an escape plan under the eyes of two witnesses. Suddenly, the two heroes of Guizhou appear, blocking the way and calling the name of Master Eo Ja-seo. The young man opens the latrine door in a hurry and says he remembers them but has urgent business to solve there. The two swordsmen remain in absolute silence, facing the protagonist who closes the door to relieve himself. The two swordsmen say they were very moved by the young man's nobility and beg on their knees for him to lead them. They yell, begging him to be their lord, leaving the young man completely indignant and not knowing how to react in the bathroom. Eo Ja-seo slowly walks down the stone stairs of the fortress wearing his slippers. He encounters the two bald warriors who were waiting for him. The young man appears completely exhausted, with deep dark circles under his eyes. One of the bald guards clenches his fist, moved as he speaks about the training. The two begin to make solemn gestures as they explain their dedication. The protagonist points his sword and shouts with authority alongside his allies. The two bald men widen their eyes, amazed by the young master's integrity. They bow with deep respect, apologizing for their previous attitude. Eo Ja-seo just stares at them with a bored expression, not understanding any of it. His eyes express only weariness at the exaggerated situation. He opens his mouth to say something and try to calm the pair down. The young man puts his hands on his hips and looks at the floor, deep in thought. He sighs, annoyed at having to deal with another senseless problem. The protagonist gives a direct order, and the two guards pay close attention. They promptly draw their swords at the young hero's command. The duo shouts with fierce determination, ready to follow any order. The group begins to walk across the fortress's immense outer courtyard. Eo Ja-seo leads the way with his hands behind his back under their watchful eyes. He glances sideways suspiciously at the two, who are following him closely. The guards maintain a terrifyingly serious and focused expression. They enter the wooden corridors of the residence in silence. The protagonist approaches a room that has a patterned curtain. He pulls back the curtain to see what is happening inside. The young man encounters several men covered in bandages and bruises. Eo Ja-seo grimaces in disgust at the sight of their miserable state. The two bald guards draw their swords to protect the young master. One of them shouts threateningly, ready to attack the wounded men. The young man is startled by the violent and immediate reaction of his guards. To play it off, he assumes an arrogant posture and clears his throat. The leader of the wounded men begs desperately for mercy. All the injured men kneel on the floor before the protagonist. Eo Ja-seo stares down at them with a cold and superior look. The man with the mustache continues to plead for forgiveness in a dramatic way. The guard advances with his sword drawn, telling the man to be quiet. The young man raises his hands, asking his ally to calm down. He makes a casual gesture, allowing the prisoner to speak his mind. The injured leader shouts with emotion, shedding tears of desperation. He bangs his forehead hard against the floor as a sign of extreme submission. His forehead becomes completely red and bruised after the heavy impact. The protagonist watches it all with an expression of disdain. He waves his hand, dismissing the man's dramatic apologies. A beautiful woman opens the curtain, bringing a bowl of soup and smiling. Ja-seo is surprised and confused by her sudden arrival. She enters the room gracefully, carrying the food tray. The young woman looks at him with a deep gaze and a mysterious smile. The wounded men cry with emotion, calling the protagonist brother. The young man remembers when he beat them all up with a stick. He clears his throat awkwardly and accepts the bowl of soup offered to him. His eyes narrow as he analyzes the situation with caution. The protagonist eats the soup, smiling back at the mysterious woman. Eo Ja-seo chews the food half-heartedly as the soup drips from his mouth. The room curtain opens suddenly, revealing the presence of an important man. The well-dressed man enters the chamber with a confident smile and an imposing posture. He puts his hand on the protagonist's shoulder, taking him by surprise and leaving him apprehensive. The visitor shows a proud smile as he speaks quite confidently. Eo Ja-seo is shocked and tense, not knowing how to react to such proximity. The man looks back with disdain, demonstrating his total superiority in that place. The young man watches with disgust as a piece of spicy food is offered to him. The allies watch the scene, surprised by the exotic delicacy the young man must eat. He stuffs the food into his mouth all at once and nearly chokes on the terrible flavor of the dish. The protagonist sweats in agony, trying to endure that culinary torture. He remembers a fight where he landed a powerful punch against an opponent. A painful memory of an old master, wounded in the chest, appears in his mind. The two bald guards smile, full of pride to see the young man's determination. The injured men also show respect and deep gratitude to the young hero. A large crowd gathers in the fortress courtyard to celebrate the young man's actions. An imposing portrait is painted, depicting the youth with a heroic and legendary look. After so much chaos, the protagonist finally manages to rest in his bed. The clear sky with birds flying brings a rare feeling of peace the next day. Eo Ja-seo sleeps peacefully with a slight smile of relief on his face. He seems to enjoy every second of that deep and comforting sleep. Suddenly, he wakes up scared and sweating cold, as if he had a terrible nightmare. Under a torrential downpour, the young man walks alone through the empty fortress courtyard. He moves forward with determination, despite being completely soaked by the rain. His expression is serious and focused while the rain runs down his tired face. He walks through the corridors lit by lanterns toward the main hall. Upon entering the large hall with the red carpet, the young man encounters two figures. The silhouettes of two imposing elders wait for the protagonist at the end of the room. One of the old masters has a long white beard and wears very elegant clothing. He begins to explain the division of power levels among the warriors of that world. The first level shown is that of extremely agile second-class warriors. Next, the image of an elegant warrior appears, representing the first class. The super class level is demonstrated with refined and powerful sword techniques. Finally, the maximum level, known as the peak of strength, is illustrated majestically. The white bearded elder finishes the explanation while maintaining an imposing posture. He stares at the young man seriously, waiting to see what his reaction will be. Eo Ja-seo swallows hard, feeling the immense spiritual pressure coming from the old man. Sweat runs down his face while he tries to keep calm under that gaze. He decides to approach the two elders with great respect to start the conversation. The young man bows deeply, making a formal greeting to the great masters. The two old men observe the young man's humble attitude with very attentive eyes. The white, bearded leader strokes his chin and begins to speak to the youth. Eo Ja-seo widens his eyes, surprised by what he has just heard from the elder. The master gestures calmly, explaining something very important to the young man. The protagonist gets nervous and tries to justify himself quickly with his hands joined. He speaks hurriedly, trying to convince the elders of his real intentions. The shadows of the three men stretch across the red carpet under the hall's light. The masters listen to the young man's arguments without interrupting his detailed explanation. Old Yop-sung holds his wooden staff, observing the young man attentively. He shows a thoughtful expression, reflecting on everything the boy said. Eo Ja-seo is completely shocked and speechless at what he has just heard. The young man holds his chest tightly, trying to process that immense surprise. The old master Yop-sung shows a thoughtful expression while sighing deeply. He gives a friendly pat on the back to the other elder, while laughing at the situation. The protagonist is confused to see the master's arm extending toward him. Yop-sung exchanges a few more words with the other leader, who listens attentively. The elder gives a half-smile to the young man before moving away a bit. The two old masters begin to walk along the red carpet, leaving the youth alone. Yop-sung turns around and offers an old, dusty book to the protagonist. Eo Ja-seo receives the mysterious manual with an expression of pure hesitation and doubt. The elder explains the importance of that booklet while pointing with his staff. The master opens a bizarre ear-to-ear smile that scares the young man a little. The young man questions, confused, why he is receiving such a strange object. The old master only maintains silence with a mysterious and enigmatic look. Protagonist sweats cold, not understanding the real intentions of that strange man. Without giving further explanations, the elder turns around and begins to walk away through the hall. He looks back one last time with a serious countenance that intrigues the young man. Eo Ja-seo remains standing in the middle of the great hall, staring at the book in his hands. He observes the details of the worn-out cover of that mysterious booklet with attention. The youth opens the manual to read the content, while asking himself the purpose of it. To his surprise, the pages reveal noodle recipes mixed with internal energy circulation techniques. The protagonist has a blank expression, unable to believe he received a cookbook. The elder continues walking away with a satisfied smile on his face. Meanwhile, the heavy rain continues to fall outside the great temple. Later, the young man sits at the table with the lord of the fortress, who pushes a wooden box toward him. The protagonist stares at the object, intrigued and anxious to find out what is inside. In his thoughts, he celebrates wildly, imagining that he is going to make a fortune. Upon opening the box, he finds a brilliant golden pill of spiritual energy. The Lord observes the young man's reaction while calmly enjoying his drink. He begins to speak with a sarcastic smile that puts the young man on high alert. The protagonist begins to sweat cold, realizing that this valuable offer has a price. The gold pill shines intensely, symbolizing a power capable of changing destiny. Seal makes a grimace of concern, knowing the danger this mission will bring. The conversation continues in the silent room, while the sound of the storm echoes outside. The young man stares at the pill, pensive, weighing the risks of accepting the deal. The Lord gets up from the table and walks toward the window to observe the heavy rain. The protagonist remains seated, looking despondently at the open box in front of him. The man with the mustache looks back sideways, waiting for a definitive answer. He maintains a piercing and calculating gaze on the young man, who remains in doubt. The leader of the fortress speaks about an important expedition that must be carried out. He focuses his attention on the storm falling outside his chambers. The young man rests his chin on his hand, feeling the weight of all that responsibility. He goes into total panic and shouts, pulling his own hair in such desperation. The protagonist imagines the band of wounded men, happy and hopeful, looking at him. He rests his head on the table, defeated by the pressure of having to lead those people. The Lord observes the young man's dramatic suffering with a cold and indifferent look. The man continues speaking about the details of the dangerous journey that awaits them. Suddenly, the young man stands up with an imposing and determined posture before the leader. He cracks a maniacal and determined smile, showing he will accept the great challenge. The wooden box is closed, officially sealing the agreement between the two men. Eo Ja-seo puts his hand on his chest and flashes a friendly smile to try to look helpful. His eyes narrow with absolute focus, while he pretends to agree with the plan. The lord of the fortress shows a serious and concentrated look while observing the young man's reaction. The protagonist notices the heavy atmosphere and begins to show slight concern. A terrifying vision of a shadowy, blood-stained hand appears to illustrate the danger. He remembers the threat of an extremely intimidating and violent demonic warrior. The young man begins to tremble with fear as he recalls the brutal strength of that terrible adversary. He observes the lord from behind while trying desperately to control his nervousness. The man in black clenches his fists tightly, demonstrating his strong determination for the mission. He turns abruptly, pointing his finger, while the storm lights up the room outside. The Lord shouts with authority, emphasizing the scale of the danger waiting on the path. Eo Ja-seo is completely stunned, eyes fixed before that speech. The lord of the fortress stares at him firmly with a look that accepts no refusals. Strong lightning bolt cuts through the dark sky, illuminating the silhouettes of the two men in the hall. The protagonist makes a suspicious grimace, trying to understand the real motives of the journey. From the top of the hall, it is possible to see the tension between the two characters who barely move. The young man remains silent, trying to process the predicament he has gotten himself into. He sweats cold while thinking of a way to escape such a complicated situation. The youth remembers a violent blow that made him spit blood in a previous combat. Memories of the violent battle continue to torment the poor protagonist's mind. He fakes an awkward smile while placing his hand on his chest to mask the panic. The youth gestures fearfully, trying to find any excuse to refuse the mission. The lord just gestures in a friendly way, completely ignoring the young man's desperation. Eo Ja-seo begins to reason about the advantages and risks of accepting that deal. He analyzes the situation in silence, weighing every possibility to ensure his life. With a clenched fist gesture, the youth seems to finally reach a logical conclusion. The man with the mustache smiles, satisfied to see that the protagonist is yielding to the plan. The youth makes a formal, very respectful greeting, sealing his participation in the expedition. On the inside, he displays a wicked smile, planning to get the best out of the situation. The leader of the fortress gives a friendly tap on his shoulder, showing approval. He stares at the young man with a look of complicity, quite satisfied with the result. The Lord praises the young hero's supposed bravery and warns that they will leave today. The protagonist goes into absolute despair, realizing he will have no time to breathe. The heavy rain continues falling on the fortress roof during that dark night. The young man remains paralyzed with wide eyes, unable to believe his bad luck. His eyes express only absolute dread at how quickly things have changed. The young servant comments that the situation is getting more and more uncomfortable there. The youth makes an awkward bow to the warrior, who has just arrived at the scene. The lord of the fortress asks for a moment, calling the attention of everyone present in the room. Two new characters dressed in beautiful green attire enter the large hall. An elegant young man leads the way, accompanied by a girl with a delicate appearance. The warrior in green passes the protagonist, sporting a very smug smile. He exudes arrogance under the deeply annoyed and uncomfortable gaze of the protagonist. The two newcomers bow respectfully before the fortress leader. The youth is surprised to hear the murmurs about the identity of that stuck-up warrior. He is quite uncomfortable with the presence of such a fool of himself guy. The Lord introduces the new allies to the protagonist, starting the proper introductions. Eo Ja-seo forces another sympathetic smile and makes a formal greeting to his new colleagues. The girl in green observes him with curiosity while he tries to look like a great hero. She opens an extremely sweet smile that leaves the poor protagonist totally flustered. The friendly girl in green approaches the protagonist with a very warm smile. She shows an extremely cute expression that hides a mischievous personality. Eo Ja-seo widens his eyes and begins to sweat cold at that sudden approach. A terrifying memory of another girl pops into his mind, throwing the youth into a panic. The protagonist jumps backward, scared, while the others try to understand the startle. He tries to hide his extreme nervousness, but continues sweating cold in front of everyone. The lady is left totally stunned and confused by the young hero's desperate attitude. The lord of the fortress clears his throat awkwardly to break the ice in the room. The warrior in green hits his own forehead, showing quite a bit of vicarious embarrassment. Soon after, he bursts into laughter, finding the protagonist's reaction very funny. The youth laughs in a loud and fun way, calling the attention of everyone around him. He begins to speak to the protagonist, while the lady beside him remains very calm. Eo Ja-seo makes an awkward bow, trying to regain his dignity after the embarrassment. The lord of the fortress observes the young people's interaction with a serious and attentive countenance. The youth finds himself squeezed between his new allies, feeling the weight of the whole situation. Suddenly, he feels a strong cramp and puts his hand on his belly with a bad expression. The warrior in green is astonished by the protagonist's sudden words and attitude. He adjusts his hair, pensive, while trying to analyze the new colleague's real intentions. The youth remembers a fierce sword fight where he almost lost his own life. The protagonist puts his hand on his chin, pensive, pretending to be working out a serious plan. The ally in green agrees, nodding pensively at the young man's posture. Eo Ja-seo gestures with both hands open while trying to explain his point of view. The two new allies decide to say goodbye and begin to walk along the hall's carpet. The youth waves from afar, relieved to finally see the two move away from his presence. The warrior turns around with a cheerful smile and waves back, showing sympathy. He displays a very confident and friendly smile, trusting his new partner fully. The protagonist stares at him with a serious and suspicious look, maintaining his attentive posture. The ally in green gives a half smile, appearing quite satisfied with the meeting. He continues moving away, backwards, with his hands on his waist in a very relaxed pose. Eo Ja-seo forces another tight smile and waves, trying to look as friendly as possible. He joins his hands in a formal bow, maintaining his disguise until the very last second. The warrior shouts another word of encouragement from afar, while the lady just accompanies him. The youth turns around and begins to walk in the opposite direction with firm and hurried steps. As soon as he leaves their field of vision, his expression shifts to total and absolute panic. He begins to run desperately, kicking up dust through the fortress corridors. The two allies in green stop and look back, surprised by that sudden flight. The young man in green watches the protagonist run with a very curious expression. The lady narrows her eyes, showing that she is quite suspicious of that shatty attitude. The warrior puts his hand on his chin, intrigued by the bizarre behavior of the new partner. The young woman approaches him and whispers something in her companion's ear about the protagonist. Meanwhile, the two bald guards walk through the fortress's outer stone courtyard. A mysterious spy dressed in black watches the youth clean his sword through the bedroom window. The masked ninja spies on everything from the top of the roof, maintaining absolute focus on the protagonist. The guards run excited, shouting that the youth has been chosen as the expedition leader. They enter the room and see the young master concentrated on examining his sharp blade. The two bald men cry with emotion, admiring the courage and nobility of the young warrior. Eo Ja-seo lowers his head melancholically, pretending to be accepting his fate. Suddenly, he begins to cry desperately in terror upon realizing he will have to face terrible monsters on the expedition.